Good afternoon. My name is Beatrice Stutz, and on behalf of the Nova Scotia Tourism Human Resource Council, I welcome you to the 2022 Virtual Labour Market Forum. I'm honored to co-chair with Scott Travis, and together we will lead you through this important event. Before we begin, we would like to acknowledge that while we may be gathered virtually, we are meeting on the traditional and unceded territory of the Mi'kmaq people. These lands are governed by the treaties of peace and friendship, and we recognize that we are all treaty people. While we had originally planned to hold this event in person, the Omicron variant and shifting public health protocols determined the best course of action was to move to a virtual platform. The past 2 years have seen the tourism sector around the world and right here at home experience tremendous consequences of COVID-19 as travel was halted, businesses were disrupted, and workforce issues were amplified. Tourism is a crucial part of the economy in Nova Scotia, a generator of jobs and revenue for business, communities, and government. 1 in 3 Nova Scotians gets their first job in the tourism industry, and just before the pandemic hit, the sector was a leading employer in the province, providing jobs to 55,000 people. Nova Scotia's tourism industry lost 30,000 jobs in the first few months of the pandemic, and we still have approximately 20,000 positions unfilled. Having a stable and skilled workforce will be fundamental to our capacity to ramp back up and reopen more fulsomely. The industry is facing a rebuilding process that will take time, innovation, and being open to doing things differently moving forward. There is no silver bullet or singular answer around the labor challenges facing the industry as we reopen. We all have work to do to repair reputational damage, rebuild confidence, and attract workers back. I'm pretty confident in saying, regardless whether we are in a rural or urban setting, we are all facing the same challenges overall. Many of the challenges we are facing today have already started to show pre-pandemic, but have magnified and sped up drastically over the past 2 years. As a business operator in a rural setting, one standout factor in attracting and recruiting today's workforce is certainly the lack of inventory of affordable housing. While this is not the only significant issue, it is a major sticking point.
Speaking from my property that I operate, it's funny that we're essentially almost 2 years to the day when we actually locked our hotel for 12 weeks. So if you call that the lowest of the lows, and then think of the highest of the highs, I think of this past Saturday that, you know, our hotel was almost 90%. Our average rate was really, really strong, especially for this time of year. And doing it with an entirely new team was a pretty special moment to introduce them to what this business is really all about. So for me, it's great that we're doing this labor forum at the moment. So thank you, B, for the intro. The Nova Scotia Tourism Human Resource Council has been working with industry from across the province since the pandemic hit, providing resources and programs such as the Tourism Strong Communication Portal, Clean It Right training, and broad help desk supports. This afternoon is part 1 of the labor forum, and we're hope to host a follow-up in-person session over the coming months, so stay tuned. We are pleased to have over 100 attendees, and really the number is much closer to 200 given the shared screens and groups watching together in communities right across the province. Business owners and operators of every size and type of tourism enterprise, managers and department heads, educators and government departments are spending some time with us today. So thank you to everyone for your commitment to this crucial challenge we currently face. Today's agenda has been planned to share a national perspective on rebuilding the tourism workforce and examine opportunities for some practical tips and best practices in the changing world of managing tourism labor. We will hear from the National Commissioner for Employment Insurance around reforms to the EI system, and our closing keynote is sure to motivate and build your confidence as we move forward to this new reality. I am now pleased to announce Darlene Grant Finder, President of Tie-ins and Executive Director of the Nova Scotia Tourism Human Resource Council, who will moderate our employment best practice panel. Darlene?
Thank you. Thank you, Scott, and thank you, Beatrice. We appreciate you stepping up to co-host this event. On behalf of the Board of Directors of Tie-ins and the Council members, I want to thank everybody for making time today to start what will be a very important conversation for us over the next few years. So as we begin to rebuild our workforce, like many things in life, we need to start with what we can do on an individual basis and at our own business level. COVID has provided a time of reflection, and with the massive disruption it has caused, we also have massive opportunity to rethink the way we manage our workplaces and position the work in the sector in a new light. According to the World Travel and Tourism Council, it is predicted that innovation and technology advancement in tourism work will advance 10 to 15 years in the next 24 months as the sector rebuilds. And this is because we have to do it. There are already studies underway of leading tourism organization systematically changing the way work is done. And through the National Sector Council here in Canada, Tourism HR Canada, they are undertaking work to redefine skills and job positions. Tourism used to have 417 occupations, and I can expect over the next year or two, the way work is defined and the number of positions will dramatically decrease as you look for increased productivity and cross-training and skills. Earlier this year, I had the pleasure of participating in a national panel discussion. The focus was on operator-led solutions, and we thought this would be a great discussion today in part one of the Nova Scotia Labour Forum. It's our hope that you'll walk away with some very practical ideas of what you can do today in your own business. This does not, however, mitigate the larger context of the challenges, and we will start the session today with a 15-minute presentation by Philip Mondor, President and CEO of Tourism HR Canada. Philip will set the context for where we are at as it relates to the tourism workforce and some of the things we need to do to adjust the culture of tourism work. After Philip, we will hear from Tracy Calamares. She's Vice President of Talent and Culture with Accor Hotels. Accor has over 5,100 properties in 110 countries. We'll hear then from our very own Patrick Wallace. Patrick and his wife, Pamela Wallace, own and operate Nova Scotia's premier luxury wilderness resort, Trope Point Lodge. We are leaving time for discussion and we want to answer your questions. And again, it's our hope that you'll walk away from today's session with at least 2 to 3 practical things that you can do starting tomorrow. I'm now going to hand off to Philip. After the presentations, we'll open it up to discussions and we'll all be on the screen. As I said, Philip is President and CEO of Tourism HR Canada. He brings over 30 years of tourism labor market expertise to the discussion. Under Philip's leadership, the National Council is one of the strongest sector councils in Canada. And the work Philip and his team have done over the years is having a profound impact on the professionalization of the tourism sector. Philip, hand it off to you.
Well, thank you so much, Darlene. I really appreciate the opportunity to connect with everyone today. Let me just go to share my screen right away, make sure that we are working well. And just a quick nod from you, Darlene, to make sure that you can see this. Thank you. Okay. Thank you so much again for this invitation and this opportunity to connect with everyone. I'm going to use my 15 minutes as smartly as I can. As Darlene indicated, really to help set the stage or to provide some context on the current labor crisis that we are all facing. I really had to be quite selective in terms of the information and comments I'll offer. The PowerPoint as well will be circulated to you. So hopefully we can just spend this quick time looking at some of the key information. Now, for today, what I've done is basically put this into 2 sections. One, I'll start with first defining the problem. Now, I appreciate that everyone is well aware of the challenges and issues they're facing, but I'll put it in context. And then I'm going to spend more of the time speaking directly to some of the strategies that we're undertaking to recover and how that might translate into some very direct things that you can be doing today. So to begin with, the labor crisis that we're talking about here is truly unprecedented. It's not a word I tend to use very often, but with 31 years at this table, I can tell you we've never seen the trends and the issues that we're facing today. The reality is that this slide is also probably familiar to a number of people who've heard me speak. It's often a place where I start, and I think it's a good place to start. At the moment, the issues we're facing are more than just related to shortages of workers. It is also concerning that we have massive skills mismatches, and also we are facing increasing number of structural constraints, what I call on the slide here, mobility and employment barriers. And all of this combined, or all of this working together, is also contributed to that reputational damage that you heard Beatrice speak to. When I list on the slide here that we are over 400,000 fewer workers than we were pre-pandemic, at one point mid-pandemic, we were over 550,000 fewer. Today, we're at about 400,000 fewer than we were. And by the way, for the summer coming up, we expect a shortfall of about 310,000 with the current situation we are in. When it comes to skills mismatch, this should be alarming to most operators. What it really means is that we're not optimizing our current workforce to the extent that we should. Anywhere between 25 and 40% of our workers do not have the skills required for them to cope or do the job well. Now, it does vary depending on the role you're in and where you are, but that is a significant challenge for us. And finally, that third category on structural barriers. The list is growing and there are many, everything from housing through lack of transportation, childcare, but indeed there are other factors as well. Now, we do have papers on these details and I won't go through them any further, but it does put it in context that the challenges we're facing here are multifaceted, they are complex, they involve many dimensions, and they all work together. Now, to carry this forward, how does tourism stack up? Well, compared to the economy overall, if you look at the complete pandemic period, this was data from 7 weeks ago, you can see that most industries have come back to pre-pandemic levels or near recovery. In fact, some have exceeded, and I'll show a slide on that. Tourism, on the other hand, continues to lag, and we will have a protracted recovery. And in fact, in the tourism sector, which includes the 5 industries listed on the screen, some have had bigger challenges than others. In fact, accommodations wins the race by a long stretch in terms of the percentage of impact, but also the sheer volume of workers attached to the industry. Again, there is data on our website that contains specific numbers on each of those. We also thought it would be helpful to kind of look at this from a longer term perspective. This slide is showing where employment levels were at in our industry from 2010 right through to today. In January, by the way, the number was 1.7 million. So we were incrementally up a little bit, but that is still about 300,000 short of what we would normally be at that time of year. Now, the alarming thing about this more than anything is that the levels we are at in January are the same levels of employment we were at in February of 2006. It shows you the kind of losses we've faced and in fact, the difficulty we will have in trying to recover to those levels, which I should remind everyone, were not optimal levels to begin with. We were facing significant shortages pre-pandemic. The pandemic has only heightened and made the challenges more difficult. This is a piece of information I took directly from our website. I just took a screenshot and put it in here, but it's to illustrate for you what it looks like in Nova Scotia. Effectively, it's the same information from the previous slide, but bringing it right down to your province and looking at it strictly from the pandemic period. Quickly, what this tells you here, I mean, the blue line is the baseline we're using from 2019, but you can see in 2020, you were already beginning to track higher. The reality was that you had the highest numbers of workers recorded in Nova Scotia at that time, with nearly 55,000 tourism workers, and projections for the summer of 2020 were going to bring you around 63,000 workers, which would have been a record. However, by April 2020, not even 8 weeks later, your tourism employment fell to 26,500. Roughly half of your workforce was lost in 8 weeks. By the end of the calendar year, you were at about a 24% loss over what you would normally have expected, or what you had gained from the year. So, I mean, it didn't get a lot better. What you see here in trends, in fact, are linked a lot to the different kinds of constraints that the sector was under, but also the vacillating levels of how the pandemic played out. There's much more I could say about this, but again, I encourage you to go to the website. You can get more data and specifics. But I'll leave it on a note to say that there's a lot of reason for optimism if you look forward. There is clear trajectory around demand, and we know recovery is more possible than it was in the past. The challenge, however, and I'll underscore this a few times, is that it'll be hampered by the shortfall of workers. So part of our challenge now is not just that there is a demand, there's a very high demand, in fact, perhaps larger than what it was pre-pandemic for the products and services. The challenge will be how much can we fulfill? Now, put this a little bit further. I'll be quick with a few other slides here. Total vacancy rates. Again, the sector outreaches nearly any other industry in Canada by at least double, if not more. And frankly, over the entire duration of the pandemic, we were at an unemployment rate roughly twice of the economy overall. So when you hear the term hardest hit, this is really an illustration of it. And so is this. Now, there were industries that grew and did very well during the pandemic, and the economy grew, and those are the ones in the orange. But there are industries that, of course, struggled. And again, accommodation and food services being a core segment of our industry was the one that struggled the most in terms of sheer numbers. And by the way, if you look at it from another perspective in terms of percentages, again, this industry was the loser of the pack. But all the loss we've had of our workers, a good number of them, almost 80%, well, somewhere between 70 and 80%, it's very hard to measure, have gone to the industries that you see on the top end of the screen, largely healthcare and IT. Now, which occupations are we most concerned about? This is by scale, the volume of occupations where we have shortages. This was taken in November, at a time when we were at that moment, even with all the suppressed activities, over 210,000 workers short of vacancies, jobs that would have been filled had there been workers. And what were they? Well, the larger volume ones are on the screen, but in fact, putting it still in perspective, there were some even larger. And again, relative to scale, these are the kinds of occupations of greatest concern, but they're not the only ones. In survey work we did in 2019, which happened to wrap up just before the pandemic, we were already identifying the challenges we were facing. And by sector, these are the items that were identified by our market research. But of perhaps greater concern, oh, sorry, that was supposed to go forward. Let's try that again. Of greater concern, perhaps, is what we're projecting moving forward. This data is as of January, and it's a lot of information to absorb here, but you can check out the deck later. What's worth noting here is that the occupations that are highlighted are the ones of very high volume in this industry. And so if you look at something like bakers or front desk agents, high volume occupations, but we expect that the demand increase, in other words, that the need for these workers is going to grow up to 30% over the next decade. So the shortages we're facing today are only going to get greater, and so will the challenge, because it's a tightening labor market. It was pre-pandemic, but it's going to grow. You can see the gap here. This is across the labor market overall. The bottom line is where the numbers exist in terms of our demographics and what's anticipated as a reliable supply. But the trajectory that you see on the top is where the demand for growth is, except if we don't have workers to respond to that, we will not be able to meet it. Now, this sector is particularly concerned about that because of our protracted nature of recovery and the fact that we are competing with all other industries for some of that labor. Now, I'll end all the data by simply saying, go to our website, check the labor market tab. There's lots of different data points. I pulled some directly from the COVID impact recovery, the employment tracker, but there are other things that are of interest to you. Please go check it out. It's free, it's accessible to you, it's updated monthly. You can get it right down to the provincial level, even right down to your riding level in terms of looking at the data and by sector. Finally, the other related point in there is the employment tracker tool, which I refer to as one of the major things, was brought about because of COVID. So if you're looking for specific impacts of COVID, all of this type of information is available underneath that tab. Go check it out. And I'll end the data slides by bringing one more into perspective here. I had recently prepared this for a discussion we've been having at the federal level with different government departments and associations. It has to do with current level of immigrants working in our industry. This is a very topical point because we know moving forward that one of the more reliable supplies we have to be concerned with is new Canadians and immigrants. It's just not enough Canadians to fill roles. The current landscape is what you see on there. Basically, the lighter provinces have a much smaller percentage of current immigrants as part of the tourism workforce, and then the darker provinces have a higher percentage. I raise this as an example to show you that in Atlantic Canada in particular, there's lots of room for more strategies to try and attract new Canadians as part of your workforce. And indeed, this is going to happen across the industry, but and across Canada. But right now, really the places where there are the fewest numbers of workers are new Canadian workers are in your region of Canada. Okay, I'll leave it at that. That was just food for thought. This slide basically says what are the impacts of not having workers, and I'm sure you're familiar with all of these challenges that you face as an operator. I won't speak to them because it's already painful enough of what I described. But let me shift gears now and tell you a little bit about what we're trying to work on at the national level and where some of this can come into play for you. There is a workforce recovery strategy in hand. It is comprised largely of these 6 areas that we're working on. The number 1 is really about recovery programs and services for reskilling and upskilling the workforce, taking into consideration new skills and different demands. Gratefully, ESDC has supplied us funding and the projects have just commenced on that. Number 2 is around digitalization to enhance business resilience. The calls for proposals on activities for that was just launched this week. Attraction and retention is a comprehensive strategy we have in play. We will be moving forward on a very large plan here. In fact, I have a call with the Minister of Tourism this afternoon to try to solidify a few factors on that. Employment practices, reform, and so on are really tools to help employers manage new HR demands. We've started on some of this work. Policy work has also been a very active file already. Although Tourism HR Canada is not a policy body, we do work with associations at the federal and provincial level who carry the baton, but we do contribute to the policy framework by providing information and recommendations. And of course, there's labor market research, some of which you saw that is continuing to inform it. So there's a lot of work here, a lot of details, happy to share those with you. And I do suggest you simply connect with tie-ins or the Tourism Human Resource Council to get you more details on it. But what does it mean for you? Well, there are some programs we've been able to launch, Propel being one of them, and we just got extension by the federal government, which means we're going to have an opportunity for you to get subsidized students working for you over the summer and into the fall for the next 2 years at least, with a subsidy of up to $7,500 for any of the occupations you need to fill. We've also set up a website, again, funded by the federal government. It's been in place for most of the pandemic, but we've been enhancing it and providing more tools as we move along. In particular, there's workforce tools that you may want to check out. What we are launching today is something that you will be receiving as a person attending today's session, is a new product we call Now Hiring. It's a compendium of tools to help you, basically some current strategies that are helping you respond to the tight labor market we're in, and additional tools to help you get out of the gate with ways to help manage those activities. So that compendium is going to be available to you at no cost, and tie-ins will offer this up to you tomorrow or the day after when they do a follow-up. Finally, one other note to let you know of that all of this work is being overseen by a Pan-Canadian task force, of which tie-ins is a member and is actively engaged amongst others. Again, a lot of work that's underpinning this. I can't speak to the details, but if you're interested, please do connect with the association, who will be more than happy to speak to it for you. So that is all the time I was granted, but I just want to thank everyone and let everyone know that this is an all of sector approach. tourism at its core, of course, is a people business and one that relies on a skilled workforce to capitalize on its economic potential for Canada. The reopening of tourism businesses and guiding their recovery requires an all-sector approach, all levels. So with that, we are all working together towards building a resilient, competitive, and inclusive labor market. Wish I had more time to speak with all of you, but I hope that was enough to prime it. And again, thank you.
Thank you, Philip. That was a terrific overview. And I know we're going to get into it in the questions. And I know one of the challenges for our operators, many operators, is the number of people we've lost at a senior level. We've lost a number of managers, people that had been in the business for a long time, to other sectors. So our recruitment strategies and our retention strategies and how we reframe work in this sector, realizing that we've lost people that we probably won't get back, is going to be, it'll be an interesting discussion. Perhaps I'll get your thoughts on that after everybody else has spoken. So I'd now like to introduce to you Tracy Calamares. Tracy, as I mentioned, is Vice President of Talent for Core Hotels, and they have 5,100 properties in 110 countries. So Tracy, we appreciate it. We know how busy you are, but I also think your perspective is incredibly important. One of the things that's fascinating is, and we get stuck in our kind of silos, is this is a global industry. We have global challenges. And I know that you're living them every day in terms of what you're seeing, but also some of the practical things that you're doing as a company to, not only recruit, but to maintain the talent that you have. So Tracy, thank you for joining us.
Thanks, Darlene. And I'm not sure if my video doesn't seem to be on here, so I'm not sure if I need to do something. I'm just trying to see if my video will go on, but I'm sorry, it doesn't seem to be. So I apologize for that. Hello, everyone, and thank you for the invitation to join the panel, Darlene and team. And as Beatrice said earlier, there is no one single solution. And Scott, I heard your comments also in saying that, you've had so many peaks and valleys during this journey over COVID, and more recently, this past weekend, you were able to experience some business back to the property, and at a very good price point. And just to give you a sense of our hotels across Canada, and for those of you that don't know Accor, we have a collection of luxury properties that range from small city center properties to large city center to large resorts. And with that comes a number of challenges. We attract a wide range of guests from across different markets, leisure, family, but also a lot of our hotels are catered to group business. And we know that that is not coming back anytime soon, or in the numbers that we need it to. So we have seen varying degrees of recovery across the markets in which we operate, and difficulty in managing really the peaks and valleys in business through the last quarter of 2021. And also not just the peaks and valleys in business, but the demands of our guests, and really delivering on the expectations of our guests and attempting to staff up with those peaks and valleys. And we were seeing some good momentum. And then with Omicron, that's led us right back into layoffs again in the last quarter of last year. And because of those peaks and valleys, it's really led us to have to think about how we staff, but also how we service and what we offer. So using guest rooms for and public spaces for working spaces, for day use, flexible private office solutions for companies as a temporary solution, or even potentially longer term solution if needed. And really to help us drive that lost revenue, but also staffing challenges that we've been seeing. And on the one side of the staffing challenges, this means that we've had to look at a change in roles and how we service in our hotels and structure the roles in our hotels. So more public area attendance versus traditional room attendance. We have looked at moving to a hospitality attendant who is trained in multiple areas. For example, work in food and beverage in the morning and then move over to maybe housekeeping or public areas. We've also had to look at how we structure roles, not only because of the shift in services we offer, but also because of our inability to staff. For example, I can give you one just recently we've been dealing with in terms of night audit. In our hotels, we would have a night auditor, but we have not been able to fill that role across multiple properties. It's just not a role that attracts people in this current environment. And we have had to look at eliminating the role, shift it into a 6 a.m., look at how we might leverage our security staff and train them in that role. So many different strategies that we've been having to look at for the varying challenges. Similarly, housekeeping, we have looked at flex time, later starts, earlier end times to attract candidates. We have implemented roles that allow employees to work in a multitude of departments, from front office to food and beverage to housekeeping. And this has been challenging because it requires us to really spend a lot more time training, making sure we are hiring people who have the skills to really be able to deliver in the services that are required across multiple departments. And one of the things that Philip was talking about earlier is this huge skills gap. And it really requires a lot of front end time to ready our staff to be productive and deliver on guest expectations. It's really, as I said earlier, not a one size fits all, and it really requires thought around who are our employees today, who's our base, who are the candidates that we're trying to attract, what will work for this hotel in this market, given our guest profile and the candidate pool that we have. And so it's a variety of things. But in terms of attraction techniques specifically, you really need to think about the candidates you're trying to attract and what speaks to them. And Philip, mentioned earlier that there's, there's lots of different markets we can try and attract from, refugees, immigrants, new Canadians, students. So I think the key here, and one of the things we've really learned over the last few months, is target your marketing to the candidate you are really trying to attract. And what we've done to help us with this is we've really leveraged job platforms like Indeed to help us market and target, working with them on back-end analytics to attract candidates to our jobs. I can tell you, we have posted jobs where there has literally been not one candidate who has applied. And working with Indeed and working on some back-end analytics, we've been successful in attracting candidates. So that's been really, really helpful. And it's helped in terms of actually getting people to apply to the positions that we have available. But we've also looked at things like base attractors, base pay. Is it competitive in the market? Then let's maybe lift it a little bit. We had a hotel that we could not get any candidates to apply to for room attendants. And we had essentially no candidates to the position, not enough staff to clean rooms. We looked at so many different strategies. How can we leverage some of our other hotels in different countries to bring them into the hotel? And it just really proved to be too expensive and too time consuming, really, to have any value. So then we thought, okay, so let's think through this. Let's look at how much we're spending in overtime. And let's look at how much we're losing in revenue because we can't sell all of our rooms. So we did that analysis, and what it really ended up telling us was that, gosh, if we just raised our rates of pay, a lot of this would go away. So we raised our rates of pay to just above the local comp set, and we offered free parking. And that is what it took in that hotel to attract some really great candidates And we were really successful in hiring some great new talent into the property. In another market where we were really struggling, we looked at lifestyle benefits to attract candidates, such as gym memberships, ski passes, spa passes, dining certificates. And we rolled this into the job offer and the compensation package. And we went out to market that when we were trying to attract candidates. And then when we were securing them into their roles, we allowed them to pick the lifestyle benefit that really made the most sense to them. We introduced same day pay in another hotel to attract that shorter term worker or gig worker. Work for us for a day, work for us for a couple days in a week, and you can get your pay on the same day. This was a little trickier, a little bit more difficult, but it did speak to a certain candidate market. We have also leveraged every government program we could in terms of funding to help offset expenses. We increased referral bonuses to 2 or 3 times. If you know someone that you think might fit this property or this hotel or might enjoy part-time work here, we were giving our employees bonuses for referring employees. And we've always had a referral program, but really doubling and tripling those bonuses. And we've had a big push on high schools and getting out into the high schools, speaking with students, particularly trying to attract those grade 12 students to the industry and working with our local school boards. Some of the retention strategies that we've implemented, well, similarly to our attraction strategies, we've also implemented, increase in pay. Some of the things that we've been experiencing around that, though, is this whole compression issue with leaders. And we have actually been starting to see more of an exit of leadership in our hotels. And we have implemented what we call stay interviews to really meet with those leadership teams and each leader to really understand what motivates them to stay. And we've asked our leaders, to meet with their employees and ask them what it is that motivates them to stay so that we can customize what our retention strategies look like. We've offered flex hours, hybrid work locations, flexible schedules, benefits that matter to them, transportation allowances, career opportunities, training them to be supervisors and managers. And most important, really taking care of the ones that we have today and finding what really speaks to them in order to retain them and offering something that meets their personal needs. So I think, as I've said earlier, it's really not one size fits all, but customized solution. Thank you, Darlene.
Thank you so much, Tracy. And I'm sorry we can't see you.
Well, maybe I'll be able to figure it out as we get through. So
awesome. That's great. You've given a lot of practical examples of what operators can do. And one of the things that I heard you talk about in January that struck me was what you just talked about with the stay interview. And, many of us do exit interviews when people leave, but really taking advantage of the fact that whoever's with you now, find out the ones, what it's going to take to keep them and what's important to them. One thing we do know that COVID has done is changed people's psyche. It changed their priorities. It's making them think about things, perhaps because they had time, in terms of kind of the place they want to be and the way they want to work. So I thought that was a very practical, low-cost item that people could leave today and do, talk to their key people. Make sure that you understand what it is that's important to people. And we should be really good at this. We're in the people business. We should be the best at this. So thank you so much for all those great suggestions. And that brings me to our third kind of panelist, and then we're going to open it up to questions. As I mentioned, Patrick and his wife, Pamela, bought Trope Point Lodge in 2018, a luxury wilderness resort. And they're having some great success in terms of the focus has been around maintaining that staff and building the staff, and with the lens of quality, which I've always enjoyed when we have chatted, Patrick, in terms of kind of you understand that quality piece is not just for the customer. It's again about how you're building your brand for your staff. So welcome and thank you, and look forward to your comments.
Yeah, thank you so very much, Darlene, and good afternoon, everybody. It's a real pleasure to speak with you via Zoom today. My name is Patrick Wallace. My wife and I, Pam, are the owners of Trout Point Lodge, and just like everywhere, we've been on this very interesting ride for the last couple of years, and I'm always struck by the fact that I think the COVID realities I think maybe have illuminated changes that were necessary and important, and probably accelerated what should have been on our radar already. So we've kind of taken it as a little bit of an opportunity to really rethink everything from top to bottom. And I'm always struck, certainly every industry would say, people are the most important thing for sure. But Pam and I came here from very different backgrounds a few years ago. And if that was ever true, it is certainly true in the hospitality world. And to Philip's comment earlier, this is a people business through and through. You can make many mistakes. You can get things wrong, but you can't get this wrong. And that sort of informs and guides us in a lot of the decisions we make and the time that we spend. And I'm always struck by any tourism operator or any hospitality operator would focus quite obsessively, I think, on the guest experience in very minute detail, and spend a lot of time really trying to put themselves in the shoes of guests as they from before they arrive all the way through the time that they are with us, and then after they leave. Why don't we do the same thing with employee experience? It's equally important, if not more important. So we have spent a lot of time and a lot of effort thinking through the lens of employee experience. And there were some very interesting observations and some very interesting sort of insights that came out of that when you put yourselves in the shoes of a potential employee or a current employee, and really try to see the experience from their point of view, just in the same way that we do with guests. Same thing with reputation. I don't think there's a tourism operator out there that wouldn't care about guest feedback or doesn't care about reputation, and that's equally important on the employee side as well. And especially in a province such as ours, where there are very informal networks at play, and your reputation is not only based on what guests say, but equally importantly, I think, based on what employees say. I'd like to speak a little bit about sort of three different things, and under the banner of the title of this seminar, sort of what you can do now. We just like to share a few thoughts of things that have worked relatively well for us. This is all on a continuum of progression. So none of these things are sort of done and then finished. This is all stuff that continues to evolve and grow and breathe. And just thought we would share a few ideas about what has been successful, and maybe some of the non-traditional ways of thinking about things that have been beneficial to us. And we sort of look at hiring and retention as really two sides of the same coin. And it is, I'm sure, something that most can relate to, the thought of losing people that you care very deeply about, and people who are really invested in your business, and really know the business inside and out, is a painful thought, right? And that's something that we take very personally at our very small scale. So we talk a lot about hiring, and equally about retaining. And when you look at the time from when people actually join you on day number one to whenever they may leave and do other things, that's only a piece of the whole spectrum. And really, that spectrum starts with reputation and with name value out in the market, and goes all the way through, from being able to attract people, and how they experience Trout Point Lodge working, and then eventually, sort of if they go on to do other things, what they say about Trout Point Lodge, even if they're no longer with us. So we'll talk a little bit about the hiring, a little bit about the retaining, and also a little bit about the culture that we're trying to create, which is something that is an ongoing enterprise, and something that I think will always be important to keep your finger on, no matter what. But from a hiring perspective, I think this is the one thing that, as I mentioned before, it's the people side of things is the one thing that we just can't get wrong. It's the most important critical success factor, or call it what you will, that if we don't get this piece right, then nothing good will happen. And as such, this is our most important priority and the thing that we spend the most time on literally on a day-to-day basis as well. So the first thing that I would say is that we are almost in perpetual recruitment mode, and we do a lot of things. We have a very, I think, a pretty deep pipeline of potential candidates out there that we don't expect would be able to join us for a year, maybe two, maybe three. But filling up that funnel and treating recruitment as a permanent, ongoing enterprise is one key thing. So it's the thing we spend the most time on, and we often look out and talk about potential candidates who maybe down the road would be interested in joining us, but may not be ready or able, or for whatever reason, to do it now. But when you're up against it, and if you need to do anything next week, especially in our case where we're quite remote, it's in many cases too late. So building up that funnel and building up that pool of candidates that may down the road end up choosing to join us is something that's very important, and we spend a lot of time on. We've also been, I think, focused quite a fair bit on trying to do things in a little bit of a non-traditional way. So we never really thought in our location about hiring part-timers or flexi hours or those kinds of things. And starting a couple of years ago, we kind of expanded our field of vision, I suppose, to look at part-timers and people who, for all kinds of reasons, maybe they're have other jobs, or maybe family considerations, or other kinds of things. There's I think everyone has a different sort of perspective, and we have found that being able to engage and hire part-timers with flexible schedules, to Tracy's point earlier, has been really beneficial, and we've kind of tapped into a talent pool that we didn't even really know existed. And same sort of thing in terms of adjacent industries. We typically focused our hiring much more on hospitality, or people with hospitality backgrounds, either professional or educational. And we found looking into adjacent industries where the skill set or the profile might be the same, although the job spec is different, has really kind of opened up another talent pool that we were maybe missing a little bit before. So those are sort of a couple of things that we've done, just in terms of thinking a little bit non-traditionally about hiring. And then in terms of retaining, and when you bring people on board and they are members of the team now, we have made extremely conscious decisions to focus our efforts on not only our people, but also on all of the support and structure that goes around that. And starting from last year, this was actually at the very, very top of our sort of priority list in terms of things we can do. And of course, there are always more priorities than there is time or budget to attend to. But this year, we have implemented a human resources information system where our employees can go for all of their training, onboarding, feedback surveys, performance reviews, all of that stuff. And these are investments that not only make us more efficient, but really make sure that each and every one of our team members has a similar experience, rather than just a small select few, or just managers or anything like that. So we've invested quite a lot in the back end of that with systems that really help us make sure that the employee experience is consistent across the board. Things like group medical insurance as well, where maybe many small operators, perhaps us included, would have said, "Oh, it's something that bigger operators can do, but smaller operators can't." I think we've made the decision that that's just not a decision or not a choice that we can make anymore. It's a must do. So we've put our investments in that area too, in terms of trying to take care of the whole whole person, not just job, not just salary, not just those things, but the entire package around it as well. And that was a very conscious decision we made, including things like training budgets and whatnot. And just a final point, this is much more long term, but you know, on the culture that we're trying to develop and the culture that we're trying to instill and create here becomes very, very self-enforcing or reinforcing in a good way over time. And we have spent a lot of time really looking at, you know, sort of how we build a culture where we take care of the whole person. So it's not just the job that you do, but we're always struck by the fact that you know, I'm not very good at separating work life and personal life. So you bring your work home and you bring your personal life to work. Maybe others are better at it, but we take the same approach to say we need a culture that that really caters and cares about the entire, you know, the whole person, if you will. And that's led us to some very important decisions. We extended our season. We were seasonal before. We've extended to being open close to year round. And the reason for doing that was really ultimately the most important reason was to be able to retain and keep people that we really care about. And the seasonality that is so you know, prevalent here has a big downside to it, where at the end of a season you may have to say goodbye to people that you really care about and really make a great contribution to the business. So, so those are some of the decisions we've made that that are all part of this this culture of taking care of our people as best we can. And if we do that well, then the guest experience and everything else flows from there. So just a few points on hiring, on retention, and on kind of the culture that we've been trying to bring. And it's an ongoing challenge. It's a daily challenge, but it's very, very encouraging when you start to see things improve. And I think coming out of COVID, we will be, you know, this will be even more important because some of these changes I think are going to be with us for the long term. So very happy to share some of our perspectives from our tiny little luxury wilderness lodge out here in the woods, and very struck by the commonality of challenges and things that were mentioned by others as well. So thank you so very much for the opportunity.
Thank you, Patrick. That was terrific. And I think you've done an incredible job of kind of articulating really what you're doing there is what we have to do with the sector. You know, traditionally, you talked about some of the issues we should have been paying attention to. We've accepted the fact that we lose a lot of people every year. We've accepted the fact that we have a large percentage of our workers that are part-time, and because we're busy and, you know, we're turning people over. So I do think it's time for a reset, and what you've done at your property and some of the examples Tracy has given, you know, is really looking at this almost like a manufacturing process. You're putting all the pieces in place. The lens of the employee experience, incredibly important. Early in my career, a steam general manager here said to me, you know, I realized early on, he was from London, and he came over and he said, I realized early on that we spend a lot of money with our sales teams and our managers and getting the business, and we spend very little time with the people that are interacting with our guests. And I think you referred to that a little bit today, but kind of that whole principle of looking at the person and the role they play and the importance of really cultivating a relationship with your employees. Terrific comments. We're going to open it up for questions with everybody, but I did want to start off with one. And maybe if my team, can everybody come back on? Patrick, Tracy, can you get in now? And maybe Philip, have a little discussion?
I'm still having trouble, so
Oh, okay.
you can hear me. I did
Absolutely.
back in, but I'm sorry about that.
And I know we have about 15 minutes for some discussion. One of the things I know that's going to be really important, and I think you talked about creating that destination for work at your place, Patrick, but Philip is looking at, or we are looking at nationally, kind of this campaign to reframe the image of the sector, work in the sector, and create a place, a destination for employment. The West did it for a while with the ski resorts and like creating that experience, but it has to be more than a campaign, right? And so there's a role for a national campaign, and then there's a role for what businesses will do there. So I don't know, Phil, if you got a couple minutes to talk about the concept of that whole destination for employment. And Tracy and Patrick, you may want to add another thought to that kind of whole idea. I know you've captured some of it in your comments, but I do think it has to be more than just saying, for years we say it's a good place to work, we're a great employer. we always haven't lived up to that when you get in the workplace, and we've accepted too much that that turnover is there. So Phil, we'll start with you.
Well, thank you, Darlene. So the way we see this project, and we've always actually, interesting the way you frame it, because we've struggled to define exactly what it is, because it's more than a campaign. And this is one of the things that we kind of are trying to communicate here. Look, put simply, what we are working on is a comprehensive strategy that is what we refer to as an olive sector approach, with the intent of having updated tools, new information beyond what we currently offer to help attract workers, to help retain workers. But that side of it is what people are most familiar with. And there are a number of strategies and ideas, just as both Patrick and Tracy have presented, and a number of tools to help attract people to our sector. And I'll come back to that if you like. But what's really important about the new strategy is that we've ramped up the work around helping employers address some of their HR needs, to help build capacity, to help provide them with the tools to navigate different new challenges and issues. Things that are very important, because in a post-pandemic environment, as we recover now, it's not like going back to 2019, to be very clear. We are not trying to follow the practices we did back then, or to expect the same kind of workforce that we did in 2019. There are very different changes that have come about, different kinds of skills, different contexts that we're working in, a tighter labor market. So, the tools there to help employers with those practices become increasingly more important, particularly because a lot of the industry is made up of employers with 40 or fewer workers and don't necessarily have all of the skills and capacity or to do so. But there's a third category in there as well, which has become increasingly important, which we call intermediaries. It's a bunch of tools for things like educators, career development practitioners, immigrant serving agencies, really all the channels that we could imagine will be supplies of potential workers for us, where those markets have asked for us to supply them with tools to help get people better connected with employment opportunities in our industry and to prepare people to be job ready. So we've invested very heavily in programs to help them do that. Now, there's a comprehensive strategy here that also involves the destination marketing organizations. One of the major things we've ramped up in this time is to make sure that when tourism is marketed as a destination for visitors, that we are pairing it with messages as a destination for employment and starting to feature much more about the real stars in the industry, which are the workers themselves and the environments they work in, and really propping up the kind of culture that Patrick and Tracy were describing to show that it's healthy work environments and so on. Now, I could go on here, but this is a very large exercise with DC as a key partner and the associations on board to help really get this out to the various markets. I have to say that the federal government is the one that's helping us fund this, and you'll hear more about the strategy and some of the details through tie-ins in the near future.
So if I could have Tracy and Patrick talk a little bit about how quality plays into that. So, we're going to have this big national reframing of tourism and work in the sector. And I know, Patrick, you've discussed some of it without saying the word quality, but if you're going to create that brand recognition or people think I want to work at that place, how does quality factor in? Like, just in your perspective, just a couple comments around that.
Yeah, there would be a big dissonance in terms of what we did if our guest proposition is such that we are looking at a luxury high-end experience, and here's all the components that make up the guest experience here. And if you don't mirror that in the employee experience, then you're just building it wrong, I would contend. So quality is critical, absolutely critical, and it speaks a lot to the type of the type of person that we try to recruit, but even more importantly, when they're on board, what we try to do, to continually invest in our people too. And it's one of these things where I'm always struck that you'll never find an employer who doesn't say these things, but the saying is the easy bit. It's the doing that's even more important. we've spent quite a lot of time in terms of making sure that we have for all of our team members, new ones and more experienced ones, that there are development plans in place, that there are regular opportunities to to sort of take the pulse of how those plans are moving along, and this becomes a must do, right? I think sometimes busyness gets in the way of the important things. And of course, when the season starts to roll, you say, all right, well, we just don't have time to do this, but it's just not, it's not an option. And ultimately it's, if you woke up every day thinking of what would be the most efficient thing that we could do in a day, I think you'd rapidly discover that this investment in your people is the one with the biggest return if you looked at it in those terms. And particularly with things even like onboarding, I'm always struck by I think most of us around the table have had the experience of starting a new job or joining a new company, or even way back earlier in our days, you think of the first day of school and how excited you are and how keen you are and how pumped up you are, and that if that enthusiasm is met with indifference on your first day, well, shame on us, right? Isn't that a lost opportunity? So we have spent, in our small context here, spent an awful lot of time in terms of the employee experience from day one, and making sure all of those pieces are in place, and with the idea that the quality of work and the quality of experience, guest and employee, will be greater as a result of these investments.
Darlene, I think you're on mute.
Thank you. I thought I'd get through my session without doing that. Did you want to add to the conversation here, Tracy?
I will. Thank you. Great segue. Thanks, Patrick, for that. And I 100% agree that our employee colleague experience needs to match that of our guest. And some of the things we've been thinking about is around, we look at our guest and we look at that pre-arrival, arrival, post-arrival experience. And we're doing a little bit of that with our employee base as well, the new hires that we're bringing in to our hotels. What's their pre-arrival experience? What's their arrival experience? What's their post-arrival experience? And what really struck me about what Patrick was saying was, I think you're talking a little bit about, how we really create that experience every day. And I look at our day as perishable, just like a guest room is a perishable product. If we don't sell it today, we don't get another opportunity to make that revenue that we lost today. I look at that from an employee's experience as well. If we don't do today, create that experience today for that employee, we've lost that opportunity. It's gone, it's perishable. Every single day, we need to keep laser focus on the experiences we're creating for our employees, because that really then I think goes to what Philip was saying in terms of this big campaign. Well, who's going to tell the story about our industry? It's going to be people that are in the jobs in the industry, and they better be telling very compelling, thoughtful, and fun and engaging stories. And we have to create that as the employer and as the industry. That's our job to the industry. Or it doesn't matter how much money the government spends on campaigns and investing in our industry if we can't deliver on the positive story. And I can tell you, my first job was cleaning rooms in a hotel. I didn't like the job, but oh my gosh, I had the best fun of my life. And because it was fun. And I didn't even know I loved being in the industry. I didn't know that that was the beginning of my career journey. But there's so many people who have that story to tell, and we better figure out how we're going to help deliver on that. I think the other thing is, we and Patrick touched on this a little bit about is our promise to our employees. What is our employee value proposition, and what is the promise? What are we offering to our employees every day, and what are we promising them? And we all know this. People leave because of leaders. So we better make sure we have good leaders leading the people in our properties. So that's my 2 cents worth on that.
Thank you, Tracy. Some terrific comments. I was going to say what are those two practical things people could be left with, but I think you guys have given us very practical, maybe one item each very quickly. What if you left today, this call, one thing, the first thing you could do. But I do think the real message here is, you know, our phone's ringing off the hook on labor shortage, labor shortage. This is not new. We know this. This is not going to be a quick fix. All you can do today is what you can do today in terms of changing the way you do business, rethinking the way you recruit, retain, treat the people that you have in front of you. All those things around partnerships are crucially important with educational institutions or whatever. But at the end of the day, it's what happens in your workplace. So I do think there has to be a lot more introspectiveness as an industry for us. Because it's not going to be about tactics and campaigns. It's going to be really about what we're doing and how we can really change the way people view this. If you think of some of the great destinations in Europe and how people view work or work in the sector, it does start in the education system. People are streamed in early, but it's a systematic approach to building workforces in certain sectors. So we have a lot of work to do, but I'll just close it because we have our EI Commissioner, Nancy Healey, coming on at and Scott's going to introduce her shortly. But if there was one last comment you wanted to make to the delegates, I'll just go quickly through you all. Phil, you want to start?
Thank you, Darlene. I'll be very brief here, but I just think that what we've heard today from both Patrick and Tracy reinforces a key message that I put into the notes as well, that businesses really have to realize that they're in the human capital business first and foremost. That unless we treat our employees well, that we see them and tailor the needs to each of them independently, we will continue to struggle. The only way we can compete in a tight labor market, not just within our sector, but globally and with other industries that are at, that are equally attractive or more attractive than our own, is to make sure that we make the experience for the employee top notch. And so that's got to be our focus, which basically my message then is, you've got to invest more in human capital. I think your management team need the skills and the tools and have to prioritize it. Thanks. I don't want to sound preachy there, but I know it's going to make a big difference if that capacity is there. It will just alleviate a lot of stress.
Sure. Patrick?
I wholeheartedly agree with what Philip said as well. And if you boil down this business and its its little components and its pieces, actually the hospitality industry or the way we operate out here is incredibly simple to understand, right? It's not a complex business in any way at all, and it is wholly, critically, fundamentally dependent on people. And if that's the case, then the management focus, the investments, and the attention and time need to align to that. As I mentioned before, that's the one thing that we just cannot possibly get wrong. And if we get it right, then all good things flow through that or from that. So align your investments and your focus along that critical sort of axis, and it's the one thing that you just can't get wrong. So that's where the time needs to be spent.
Thank you. And Tracy, last comment to you.
I would just say, I know this can be overwhelming. I'm sure to our audience who's hearing all of these ideas and things and oh my gosh, where do I start? What do I do first? It's, you can't do it all. So I think, you focus on maybe the two things that you think you really can have the most impact from, and do it well, but do something. Just don't do nothing. But I think if it's just too overwhelming, I think, focus on maybe two things that you feel you can really do well, and that will make an impact.
Thank you, Tracy. I want to thank our panelists very much for the time today. I think we started a little deeper conversation about, the truth about work in our sector, and there's lots of work to be done. We will follow up with Philip's now hiring toolkit for all of you that have joined the call today. And some of the tips you heard. I'm now going to hand it back over to our co-chairs, Beatrice or Scott. You let me know, and thank you very much.
Thank you, Darlene. Thank you, Philip, Tracy, and Patrick. It was a very insightful discussion for sure. As we seek ways to be more effective with our own operations, the government is undertaking similar efforts around employment insurance. Atlantic Canada is disproportionately affected by seasonality, and programs such as employment insurance will play an important role in how government policy affects getting people back to work particularly with the tourism sector. And this brings us to our next guest speaker. Ms. Nancy Healey was appointed as the Commissioner for Employers at the Canada Employment Insurance Commission for a two-year term in July of 2021. Ms. Healey is an award-winning chamber executive with 20 years of strategic and innovative leadership as a champion for business. From 2008 to 2020, she was the Chief Executive Officer of the St. John's Board of Trade, where she helped businesses succeed through advocacy work at the municipal, provincial, and federal levels. Prior to that, Ms. Healey served as the Executive Director of an industry sector association dedicated to growing the hospitality and tourism industry. Ms. Healey has served on the Board of Directors of the Newfoundland and Labrador Credit Union, was a past president of the Chamber of Commerce Executives of Canada, and a past director of the Canadian Chamber of Commerce, where she was named Executive of the Year in 2018. Today, she will share some insight around her recent consultations regarding employment insurance reform, the role of EI in the landscape of social supports for Canadians, and the unique relationship it has to seasonal workers. Welcome, Commissioner Healey.
Thank you, Beatrice, very much. Thanks for that introduction. It's the formal one that was released with my appointment. So the industry association that I work with from 2001 to 2008 with Hospitality Newfoundland and Labrador, and I had a lot of interactions with tie-ins at the time and the Canadian Tourism and Human Resource Council. So it's a sector that I know well and I love very, very, very much. So it's a pleasure to be joining you today. I was going to ask about my PowerPoint, but I do believe someone's putting it up there. That's great. Thank you very much for sharing the PowerPoint there. So I guess I have to tell you to move my slides too. Is that correct? So we can jump right, or do I have control? Let's see. Okay, so I just want to start off with giving you a little bit of a national perspective on labor market conditions. And you know, despite the Omicron variant and its impact in December, January, you know, we saw virtually employment return to its pre-pandemic levels in the fall of last year. Of course, it wasn't in every sector, and the tourism and hospitality sector was certainly one that is still struggling to recover. But job vacancies reached an all-time high in 2021 at 5.6%, and almost, as I noted, a million job vacancies. The unemployment rate had dipped to about 6.1% in November, and because of Omicron, went up to about 6.5%. Full employment we consider to be around 5%, or frictional unemployment. So, you know, labor shortages are persistent right across the country in almost every sector and industry, but there's no doubt that the hospitality and tourism sector, food service sector, accommodations have been more adversely impacted, and it seems to be a bit more prolonged. We want to go to the next slide. So I wanted to share with you some information specific on labor market conditions in Nova Scotia. So right now, the unemployment rate in the province as of January was at 7%, and you can see where the distribution between the ages in the bottom left-hand corner there, and between men and women, and where that fits in, and where the unemployment in per industry. So manufacturing, finance, and construction, they tend to be, especially construction, higher in the off season, of course. So, oh, stay there. And the job vacancy rate in Nova Scotia is at 4.3%, which is really inching up there, and is quite concerning. We want to go to the next slide. So just to give you a little bit of view into EI, employment insurance claims in Nova Scotia. So roughly in an average year, which we can take to be 18 or 19, fiscal year 18-19 or 19-20, you have about 80 to 85,000 people who claim employment insurance. And the number of those that are in seasonal industries is about 24,000, or about 40% of the total claims that are made in the province. The amount paid in employment insurance in Nova Scotia tends to be around $850 million a year. And this comes from the monitoring assessment report. We want to move on to the next slide. And this will give you a sense of labor market conditions in the hospitality sector. And this came out as of November. It's part of the labor force survey. And you can just see the growth in, the first column is third quarter of 2019, the number of job vacancies. This is the top 5 job vacancies in the country. So food counter attendants, kitchen helpers and related support occupations, food and beverage servers and cooks. I'm sure none of this is new. Maybe it was shared by the previous speaker, but just to kind of give you a sense of the magnitude of the shortage and just how industry has responded to. So you can see that the number of vacancies in 2019 for food counter attendants was 37,000. By November of 2021, it was up to 70,000, a 32,000 person increase. And the average offered hourly wage went from $13.85 to $14.85 during that time period. Food and beverage servers, a 21,000 increase from 12,700 to 34,000, and the average hourly wage went from $12.90 to $13.80, and cooks 15,430 to 31,440. So just massive increases in the sector. So we want to move on to the next slide. So one of the things that the only growth that Canada has seen in labor market has come from immigration. And just a week or so ago, the Minister of Immigration from your province of Nova Scotia announced the targets for Canada for the next 3 years. And last year, Canada hit its target. I'm not exactly sure what the number was, but it was around 410,000, maybe 415. And basically what they did was provide permanent residency and citizenship to newcomers to Canada who are already here. So there was a backlog, of course, here already within the country, and they were able to make a number of them permanent residents. So that's how they were able to meet their targets. So they've set some very ambitious targets, I think, for the federal government for 2022, 2023, and 2024. Ambitious. Not because it's not that we need it, because we need every one of these, and I think maybe the target should be higher. But you've probably heard that there's been a fairly significant backlog in processing applicants. I know more resources are being put towards that, but right now there's still like a 3-year wait in processing applications to come to Canada. So I want to go to the next slide. I want to talk to you about the temporary foreign worker program, which is often used to bring people in an expeditious manner. And one of the things that the federal government is looking at is a recognized employer model, or a process through which employers, almost like a nexus card for employers, for trusted employers who meet a certain criteria. And if they are deemed as a trusted employer, they would have a streamlined, we would hope, labor market impact assessment, or maybe none at all, because I think in many regards there are occupations that we have, definite proof that there are huge vacancies in. So we are preparing from the Commissioner of Employers some recommendations to the Department of ESDC and IRCC, Immigration and Refugees Canada, about what a trusted employer model should look like, what kind of streamlined measures we would like to see put in place there. And, we're optimistic that, officials at ESDC seem to be very forthcoming and welcoming in their part of the temporary foreign worker program and how they can streamline it. And IRCC, I think that they still, there's still so much work that needs to be done in streamlining their processes, moving from, a large part of their work is paper-based. But, at least there is a commitment to and try to improve the process. Quebec has already seen, they did a pilot project, although it started, they started talking about it in July, and they've only started working with it in the last couple of months. So it still took 6 or 7 months to get the Quebec pilot program going. But there are a number of occupations that have been identified that are going to be fast tracked for bringing into the country. So that's kind of it's a similar process, but it's not exactly along it's not a trusted employer or a recognized employer model. It's more along which categories of NOC codes will be allowed. And just on that, during the pandemic, there was actually a freeze, a ministerial, I can't remember the word they used, a ministerial instruction not to process a number of NOC codes, and a number of them were in the hospitality and food service sector. So slowly but surely, those restrictions on processing those applications are being lifted. So we can move to the next slide. So I'm going to talk a little about employment insurance program. And when I was appointed back at the end of July or early August, and it was a big flurry of activity because they were starting a consultation process on reforming EI. In budget 2021, $5 million was announced to start a consultation process on EI reform. And the initial phase was what I would deem a very narrow scope on 5 themes: access, simplification, self-employed, or 6 themes, I should say: self-employed, gig workers, life events, seasonal work, and the premium reduction program. And I'll talk a little bit about those on the next slide. But that's phase 1, which is, for argument's sake, completed now. We had our final closing roundtable last week. There will be a What You Heard document coming out next, and then it'll be up to government to decide what to do with the information they've received and what changes they'll make. And then they're going to start into another phase of consultations on reforming EI, looking at the adequacy, premium rates, and supports for self-employed. So we go to the next slide. I'll bring to your attention some concern that I have about employment insurance. This is before any changes are made. This is the EI account and its status of it. And in 2022, the actuary forecast that it'll have a $29 billion deficit. And you can see the dramatic impact of the pandemic on the fund over the last few years. In fact, at one point in time, the fund in 2020 was about $50 million in debt. Government made a transfer over to the fund because they did simplify the rules. They did make it easy to access EI. So they put some of the money that was from EI or the emergency response benefit. So they did a transfer into the account and brought it into the $36 billion deficit area. Right now, as I've noted, it's projected to be at $29 billion, and that's before we add anything to the program, any of these simplifications or other things. So if we go to the next slide, you'll see that if we increase, so right now, employers are the blue line, and they pay in 2022, if an employee is making the maximum insurable earnings, which is $60,000, $60,300, employer pays $1,333 for that employee's employment insurance, and the employee is paying around $950. In order for the fund to get back to balance in 7 years, which is what it is legislated to do, premiums are going to have to increase for employers from right now $2.21 per hundred to $2.56. And that means by 2028, an employer will be paying well over $1,800 per employee for EI. So a significant increase, and that is before we make any changes in enhancing access to the program. And I would suggest to you that employers cannot sustain an increase like this right now with the inflationary pressures that we're dealing with, the wage inflation that they're dealing with, the supply chain disruptions, and so many other things that are happening. So we go to the next slide. Here are some of the things that government is looking to do. They want to increase access. And so right now, to become eligible for EI, you need to work 420 hours anywhere in Canada. That's a universal or nationwide standard. Prior to the pandemic, depending on what the unemployment rate was, you had to work between 420 and 700 hours. So for instance, if you were in Halifax, you had to work 700 hours before you were eligible for EI because of where the unemployment rate was. And if you were in another region of Nova Scotia where the unemployment rate was higher, you could work as little as 420 hours before you became eligible for EI. Government hasn't set a specific number yet as to where they want to go with that, but I can tell you that Labor in our roundtable consultations that we've been having in every province and nationally has requested that the number of hours be reduced to 360, or about 12 weeks of work, and therefore you'd be eligible for EI. They also would like to see the benefit rate, the amount, so you get 55% of the maximum insurable earnings as the amount of benefit you get. So the length of time that you get the benefit should be increased in the amount of benefit. They've argued that it should go up to 70 or 75% of the maximum insurable earnings. Life events, during the pandemic, the EI rules were simplified to enable individuals who experience multiple life events. For instance, they had the birth of a child, and then they needed to go off for caregiver to care for an elderly parent, or if they were looking after an elderly parent and then needed to go on sick benefit, they could stack their benefits. And so they're looking to see if there's an appetite to continue to enable that. Also, looking at providing the 15 weeks of additional paternity leave for adoptive parents. Right now, adoptive parents only get the paternity benefits, not the maternity, because there's no mother who has physically given birth, and so the maternity was normally given to the mother for the 15 weeks to heal and to bond with their child. And so now one of the changes they wish to make, and there's no argument for me for this, is to enable adoptive parents to be able to get the same number of weeks of leave to be with their child as a person who has a child through natural birth. The other big issue is self-employed and gig workers that the Liberal Party ran on and is in government's the minister's mandate letters to try to do something to help self-employed and gig workers. But through the process of the consultations, I think there's become a realization of how complex this matter is, and what the definition of gig workers is. The vast majority of self-employed individuals are eligible to participate in the EI program, but they choose not to. And those that do become engaged in the EI program tend to be women during childbearing years who wish to take advantage of the maternity and paternity benefits that are there. There's no doubt that during the pandemic, self-employed and gig workers were severely impacted. And that's when, programs like the CERB came in to help those who had lost all avenues of income coming towards them. So this is an area I do believe needs a lot more research. There is something called a moral hazard. If, for a self-employed individual, when do they decide if they're to be laid off, as they're both the employer and the employee? So government has actually suggested, I think in the mandate letter to Minister Qualtrough, or maybe it was in the Liberal Party platform, that a benefit for self-employed individuals may come out of general revenues instead of the employment insurance system. And like, how would it be funded? Would the self-employed pay both the employer and the employee premium? Would government put in the employer side and the self-employed put in the employee side? So there are a lot of questions still there for that. On seasonal workers, we had a great conversation on a roundtable, and I believe Lisa participated in one of the seasonal roundtables that we had, and we discussed a lot of issues. However, government really wanted to focus on one thing, which is what they call the black hole, which tends to happen to seasonal workers in the seafood processing industry. In areas of high unemployment where there's little opportunity for other work, they would fall into a black hole where, let's say for argument's sake, they work for 15 weeks, they could get EI for 30 weeks, that's 45. You had 2 weeks on for the waiting period, so you're at 47. So what do you do for the other 5 weeks of the year? So through a number of pilot projects over the last 4, 5, 6 years, they've tweaked the program to try to come up with a formula to be able to provide 5 extra weeks of benefits to seasonal workers, so they would have coverage of EI benefits for a longer period of time. And so I think that is something they want to proceed with. The last item is the premium reduction program, which I see it in some regards as an olive branch to employers, because all these other items that you see are really geared towards employees. And the premium reduction program provides reductions in the premiums for employers who offer a short-term disability program that is equivalent to what the sickness benefit is for EI, so 15 weeks of benefit. So if you offer a group insurance program which includes a short-term disability, you can get a reduction in your EI premiums. Now, it's, I'll call it one of the best kept secrets in the country. Not that many employers take advantage of it. And even those that do find the program very cumbersome, time-consuming, full of red tape and all. I think there are many practical changes that we realized through our consultations on this that can be brought in for this program. But there is one caveat I'll add to it, is that the sickness benefit is likely to be increased from EI from 15 to 26 weeks. And that's going to call into question, will the new standard to be able to be eligible for the premium reduction program have to go from 15 to 26 weeks? That's can be a costly proposal for employers, and even offer short-term disability. Not all employers do so, but if it had to go to 26 weeks, how much more would that cost? And also the cost-benefit analysis. The amount of reduction that you got in your EI premiums and the amount of effort you had to put in, wasn't always significant enough for employers to take advantage of it. So that's what the current round of EI consultations have been about. If I was a betting person, I would think that they're going to proceed with making permanent the seasonal worker changes for the black hole. I think they'll move forward with the adoption, extending 15 weeks of leave for adoptive parents. Where they're going to land on the number of hours you need to work before you become eligible for EI, that is one I still haven't been able to figure out. If they were to make a national standard, one would think it would have, you know, it couldn't be as low as 420 hours. I mean, they brought that in during extraordinary times of the pandemic. Yet, in Atlantic Canada, that and especially in rural Atlantic Canada, that is the norm. So where is that sweet spot that where they can be, where, you know, you're not going to be a disincentive to work, and I just think it's really going to be a challenge. And as you know, EI policy has a big impact on politics in Atlantic Canada. I was just reading the story earlier today about, you know, the changes that have been made and the fortunes of political parties in Atlantic Canada. And, you know, there's a lot of MPs on the government side in Atlantic Canada. So this one's going to be a challenge for them to find out where is that number. Most jurisdictions across this country, as their consultations talked about the unique economic circumstances of every region, and therefore the entrance requirements should remain variable. But you know, government's language all the way through was about trying to make a standardization of the number of hours that you need to be to access. We want to go to the next slide. So I just want to talk to you a little bit about a couple of other programs that are available. There's a labor mobility tax credit that was announced in the last budget to help to relocate workers. They talked about, the example they gave was in the construction sector, but someone needs to move to, you know, say there's a construction, they live in Cape Breton and there's a construction job in Halifax for a period of time, they'd be able to apply to get that mobility tax credit. I would hope that it would also be available for the tourism sector. So if you have, and as we know, a lot of tourism products are in, and opportunities and accommodations are not just in, are you know, outside the major urban areas. So people need to move to be able to take that job. There is a labor mobility tax credit. There's a lot of emphasis on clean jobs and encouraging people. There's actually even going to be the development of a clean job training center. And that's to help migrate a lot of people who've been working in the carbon sector, in the offshore oil and gas sector, or out west into clean jobs. There's also the Canada training benefit, which I think will be of great interest. It's not, from talking to officials, it's not going to be contemplated during this fiscal year, but probably next. And it was originally introduced in 2019 when they started to do some consultations, and then they pulled back about what their original concept was going to be, and they do intend to do more consultation. But it is going to be a training benefit dedicated to individuals. They keep using the term self-agency, so individuals can do training. As the representative for employers, you know, I'm an advocate that employers should have a you know, a say in the training that their employees do. And you know, we do pay as employers 58% of the premiums. So I think the employers should have greater agency in what training is their employees are encouraged to take. So there will be more to come on that, and I do anticipate some consultations, and I'll make sure that TIANS is involved in that. The Sectorial Workforce Solutions Program, I actually have a slide on that one coming up, and I do hope that CDH, if you want to go to the next slide, that your Tourism Human Resource Council is looking for that. The deadline is March 18th. So this is a new pot of money. You may have been familiar with the Sectorial Initiatives Program, and this has been replaced now by the Sectorial Workforce Solutions Program. There is 900 million, I think, over 3 years dedicated to this, so about $325 million a year, I think. You'll be happy to know that, number 2 on the priority list is the hardest hit sectors, and tourism is listed as one of those. So I have a much bigger PowerPoint presentation that I received from officials that I can share with you. This is just some of the slides there, so if there's any interest in getting this, just let me know and I'll share it with you. The target number of minimum participants is 250. There should be 50 employers, and they'll support large-scale, high-impact projects, national and regional in scope, anywhere between $5 and $50 million in project funding. So a very short time period in order to get applications in, and my PowerPoint has all that. So Phil, I saw that you put up a note that you'd like to get it, so I'll send you the big, it's about an 80-page PowerPoint. So I just gave you some of the highlights. So we want to go to the next slide. So, just before I conclude, I feel your pain and of the labor shortages, and it's what I hear every day. I mean, I was appointed to talk about employment insurance matters and how that impacts employers, and I spend most of my time discussing labor shortages and trying to come up with solutions for employers on labor shortages. And I think the world is very dynamic. The importance, I caught a little bit of the previous speakers about the importance of how well you treat your employees, and that first day, how important that is. I also think we need to start thinking more about collaboration amongst sectors and within a sector. I know that the Nova Scotia Human Resource Sector Councils are meeting to talk about where there might be opportunities for collaboration, and maybe some people work in one sector in one season can work in another sector in the other season. I also think there may need to be collaboration between employers. I look at it's not uncommon for banquet centers or convention centers to lean on the banquet staff from area hotels to service a major convention or whatever. So there's a collaboration there. Well, maybe that's something else that needs to be considered in greater in other areas beyond that. One of the things I think is important for employers to do is to do a HR assessment. I've suggested to the officials in the Department of Employment Service Canada about, when the pandemic first hit, everybody was encouraged to get online, and you set up the retail shops that way, and there was money from the federal government and from ACOA and the like to help businesses get an online presence. Well, now I think there might be need for some money to help employers figure out what their HR strategy should be, and to look, do a job analysis in their business to see what jobs can be combined, where there are opportunities for automation and robotics or chatbots or those kinds of things. We see in quick service facilities a lot more self-serve capabilities, for ordering. Be it a tablet that you press or a chatbot. There's a Starbucks down in California right now that when you place your order, it's going to you're not talking to a real person. You're talking to a computer that's taking your order. So those technologies are coming along. There are also examples of like the modern lazy Susan, of a cart that goes between the kitchen and the restaurant, the seating area, and staff can put the as they bus tables, they just put the dishes on this cart, and it just goes back and pushes the button and goes back into the kitchen and back and forth. So there are technologies that are out there. I think we need to be open and flexible to some of those, but ensuring that we, certainly in your sector, the people touch points with people are very important, that you put value in those experiences, that you, when you're engaging with your customers, and the things that they can order tickets using an app or a bot or something like that. Well, that maybe that's where the resources need. You don't need to put human resources in that. You need to put them into the interpretation or the like. So I'll leave it at that, and I'm happy to take your questions.
Thank you very much, Commissioner. I'm not sure if anybody has any questions, but I know that all the presentations from today will be posted. There have been a few people indicating they would like to get the slides, so they will be posted through the Human Resource Council somehow. Anyhow, thank you again for this very informative update. Modernization of the EI framework will certainly be critically important for businesses over the coming months, particularly the potential impacts on employer contributions as the industry works to stabilize and rebuild. Now, I think it's time for a quick break before our closing speaker. So we invite all the attendees to take a 5-minute stretch, and then we'll be back for our keynote from Eddie Lemoine. Thank you again.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Welcome back, everyone. Building on some of the excellent information already shared today, I'm very pleased to welcome the forum's closing keynote speaker. Eddie Lemoine is a Canadian-born international author, seminar leader, and corporate trainer. He's a sought-after resource for both government and corporate clients. Eddie is an authority on changing demographics, diversity, performance, development, and productivity improvement. I'm pretty sure he keeps a couple of planes in the sky too, because he's all over the country constantly. He specializes in leadership, employee engagement, employee attraction and retention, resilience, and success psychology. Today, Eddie's address will focus on human resource realities, attracting and retaining a diverse workforce post-COVID. Eddie will share his thoughts on some labor trends we can expect over the coming year, building on employee attraction and retention, and steps to engage a winning team in your tourism business. Over to you, Eddie.
Awesome. Thanks, Scott. So welcome, everyone. I'm absolutely delighted to be here this afternoon, and I'm going to give you a little bit of an agenda. Now, I'm from Cape Breton, and it's really kind of interesting because I was loving the accents that I was hearing from some of the other folks that were on the call a little bit earlier. So anyone who knows, if we're from the East Coast, we can talk pretty darn fast. So I've got an hour worth of content that we're going to do, a little bit of a Q&A afterwards. I realize we're running a little bit late, but it will, I'm sure, be recorded and you'll be able to catch up on it if you miss any of it. I'm going to talk to you about some trends that are happening in the Canadian employment sector, but I'm going to unpack the numbers and dig a little deeper into what you would hear on the surface. Now, I talk on this particular presentation all over North America. And my mother had a saying, we're from Cape Breton, and she would always say that we're going to scare the bejeebers out of you. So I am literally going to scare the bejeebers out of you. That's part of what I'm going to try and do in the first half of my session. We'll talk about why engagement might be your best solution when we look at attracting and retaining people in the workforce, reasons why people join your organizations, reasons why they stay, and reasons why they leave. 6 key attributes of successful leadership in 2022, because it's really quite different as we head into 2022. And then literally one slide on closing the engagement gap that I can kind of leave you with some things to think about. Now, I am the best-selling author of a book called Bring About What You Think About. And what I really want to do today is to get you to think a little bit different as we kind of head into the future and get rid of some of the myths that might be out there around what's happening in the employment sector and so on. Now, I don't know if you can remember a time when you were little. It might have been the very first time it snowed and you ran outside to catch a snowflake on your tongue, or the first time you drove a bicycle without training wheels and you looked behind and your mom or dad weren't there. The feeling of camaraderie and excitement we used to have when we would hang around with our friends. Now, I grew up in a little town in Cape Breton. Mom and dad had a rule. You can do whatever you wanted all day long, but boy, when those streetlights come on, you better be coming home. But what happened with people when they showed up at work? Why is it we don't have that same level of camaraderie and passion and excitement? Why do we literally look forward to the streetlights coming on at the end of the day? Because we get to go home. You know, when I first started my career as a professional speaker, I used to do a lot of executive coaching, and I'm happy to say I turned 60 years old this month. And I talk a lot about generations and age and in my presentations. And you know, people would say, Eddie, I work hard all week. Around 4:30 on Friday afternoon, we stop by the liquor store, pick up half a dozen bottles of red wine, drink all weekend long and forget about work, only to get up Monday morning, have to do the whole thing over again. There's got to be a better way. And there's a group of people that show up for work every day and they love it. They can't wait to get there, and they literally get upset when the streetlights come on because they have to go home at the end of the day. Not because they don't want to go home, but because they love their job so much. And that's the group I want to talk about today. I want to talk about the most engaged employees. How do you find them? How do you attract them? Now, you all have a plan to success. Everyone that's on this call has a plan to success for one way or another. Maybe it's higher sales numbers, attracting people into your business, achieving something specific at work. So you have these organizational goals that you're trying to achieve. But in order to do that, you need to bring people into your organization. And those people have their own beliefs and values and home life balance that they're looking to achieve. But that group of employees that you get the most maximum results out of, and they have the highest job satisfaction, they're called your most engaged employees. And that's the group I want to talk about. I want to talk about how you find them, how you keep them, how you attract more. So now I am a big research person. I truly enjoyed Nancy's presentation before mine. I love looking at the data, the numbers, and I could probably go toe to toe with anyone in the country when it comes to the impact of the aging demographics or what's happening in the employment sector across the country. But if I spend the rest of my time going over numbers, I'm probably going to put you to sleep by the end of my presentation. So I'll frame it up in a way that I think you're going to find it relatively interesting. So let me share with you some trends in 2022 as we start to head off into this year. Now, this is the question that everybody is asking. What's it going to look like after the pandemic? And believe me, in the last probably 6 weeks, I've been doing quite a bit of travel across the country, meeting with a lot of different groups of executives. And everybody kind of wants it to go back to some form of normal. I think we're trying to find that kind of equilibrium where we're going to end up. One thing for sure, it's never going to go back to the way it was. And the reason why it's never going to go back to the way it was is some of the things that have happened during the pandemic were going to happen anyway. But what the pandemic did was it sped up some human resource trends that were kind of heading our way, but the pandemic kind of made us look at it a little bit different. So things like safety, convenience, cost, recruitment, all of those kind of contributors are what's going to make the work environment a little bit different as we kind of head out of the pandemic. Now, this is a really interesting one. And I have to tell you, I was at the Halifax Chamber of Commerce at a meeting several months ago. And we had this little panel where we were going around, we were talking about government programs, and the conversation got to around recruiting. And just like Nancy had said the same thing in her talk, it always is going to come back to employee attraction retention. And somebody said, well, where did the people go? And when are they coming back into the workforce? So I want to share with you where the people went. So you have a bit of insight on why we're feeling what we're feeling right now and what it's going to look like as we start to head into the future. Now, for the past 100 years, if you were running a little business here in Atlantic Canada or anywhere in the world, in the G8 countries anyway, this is what it looked like when you went out to recruit people. You'd run an ad, whatever worked for you, LinkedIn, the newspaper, and you would literally get hundreds of resumes would apply for those jobs, and you'd promote those through your organization over time, you know, to mid-level management or technical resources, whatever it happens to be, and then eventually they would work their way up and they would retire. Well, this is kind of what it looks like if we look at the Canadian job market right now. If we look at the new hires, we're really at the Z generation, the bottom of the millennials and the immigration marketplace. And you could see that we have a very limited amount of people that we're going to bring into the workforce. However, if you look at the top of this, we see quite a few people are starting to exit the workforce. So we're still kind of okay at the bottom of the baby boomers, top of the X generation is where the majority of the staff would be. But if you kind of look back at this one, I mean, you literally couldn't fail as a manager for the last 100 years. This one takes a different skill. It takes a different skill to work in an environment where the numbers are not in your favor. And I really believe that we're going to stop rewarding bad management as we kind of head into the future. So I want to walk you through how we got to where we are right now and why we're finding ourselves in this situation, because a lot of this was going to happen anyway. But what did happen was there was some acceleration because of the pandemic. And I'll share with you why that happened as well. So back in the 1950s, 1960s, baby boomers were under the age of 14 years old. And it's when we realized this was a big deal. We had to build tens of thousands of schools and pediatric wards and baby food manufacturing facilities. And we started to market to this group of individuals. And then in the 1960s, 1970s, something very interesting happened that's not happening with the same age group in today's work environment. And there's something very relevant about this. So if we were in a big room right now, I would ask the baby boomers all to stand up. So if you're born on or before 1964, I'd ask you to stand up. And what was really interesting is I've been talking about this since 2005. I literally have been showing this slide since 2005 to predict where we are right now. And the baby boomers would stand up and I'd say, if you were the only child growing up, no siblings, you can sit down. And what's interesting is the baby boomers would never sit down. But everyone that was standing in the room at the time would have represented a family larger than we currently produce in Canada. So 1.6 children per one female or 1.5 per one female, depending on whose stats you're looking at. So, but we would kind of play with this. And I'd say, if you're one of two, sit down, one of three, sit down. And I got to tell you, it's not uncommon, older baby boomers, that there is more than 10 in a family. It's not uncommon if there are more than 10, they're from Newfoundland or maybe from Cape Breton. Some of the largest families came from those areas or the province of Quebec. But what was interesting is I remember one day seeing a gentleman stand up, and he stood up as I went through every number. And finally I said to him, I said, how many people are in your family? He said, 17 siblings. I said, wow, 17 siblings. I said, what was it like growing up? Like, did you have a big house? He goes, no, a small little house. He said, I said, well, how'd you sleep 17 kids? He said, we literally slept 5 kids in the bed. I said, really? And I said, how'd you do that? He said, not by age. We did it by length. 3 long ones up and down, 2 short ones across the bottom. So I said to him, I said, well, when did you move out of your house? He said, I moved out when I was 17 years old. And I said, well, is that like early or late? And he said, it was actually a little bit late. He said, Mom and Dad were looking at me like there's something wrong with that one. Why is he still here? So it got me thinking, when do kids move out now? What relevance does it have in the employment sector, especially in your particular industry? So I went home that night and I looked at my daughter and I said to her, I said, Sasha, I said, I'm just curious, when are you leaving? And she said, Dad, she said, I'm not going anywhere tonight. I said, no, not tonight. I said, when are you actually moving out? And she said, Dad, I've never thought about it. I said, you didn't think about when you're leaving? She goes, no. She said, Dad, she said, you bought me a car, you pay for the insurance. If I'm downtown at the bar, I run low on cash. You take your iPhone out, you put money in the bank account. I own every piece of electronics, knowing the man. Mom does the laundry for me. She said, why would I leave? So it got me thinking, when do kids leave and what impact does that have on the employment sector? Well, if you had a Z generation or a Y generation living with you up until 2008, there's a pretty good chance they're going to stay with you until they're 28 years old. Well, that's significantly later than when baby boomers moved out. And what's the relevance? The relevance is life expectancy of a Z generation or a Y generation in your place of employment right now is less than 18 months. Where baby boomers literally only change their careers 3 to 4 times in their whole life. Now, I know I'm probably depressing some of you thinking these kids are never going to move out. So I checked the most recent data, and it's almost pushing 33 years old now when the Z generation will move out of the house. So now if we go to 1970s, 1980s, baby boomers started to find their way in the world. They started to have children, work their way up in the organizations they work for. In 1980s, 1990s, baby boomers actually started to spend money like drunken sailors, and they drove interest rates into double digits. But what nobody was thinking about was this little group in behind them, and that's the X generation, first negative growth generation in the history of Canada. And it happened in 7 of the 8 G8 countries. And nobody thought the impact it was going to have until we start pushing closer to where we are right now. So 1990s to 2000, baby boomers really started to find their way. They bought big homes and cars. And again, you could see this X generation, and behind that would be the Y generation, which depending on what part of Canada, and it would be bigger or smaller. In our particular case, it would be smaller because younger people tend to move to more affluent provinces. The 2000 and 2010, we get pretty close to where we are right now. We can see that baby boomers are kind of in between that 55 and 64 years of age, and some are starting to head off into the well-deserved retirement. But this is where the number gets interesting. If we go to where we are right now, people between the ages of 55 and 64 will increase by 73%. People above the age of 65 will increase by 53%. And if you look behind, there's literally nobody coming behind to be able to support that group as they start to head into the well-deserved retirement. In fact, if you were to follow this all the way out to 2040, right now we have about 8 Canadians supporting every one that's retired. By 2040, we'd only have 2 people working for every one that's retired. Now, that's never going to happen because immigration and other things will change to be able to accommodate for that. But it gives you a little bit of an insight on what the future is going to look like. Now, having said all of that, I believe this is the best time to be working in Canada. And I believe that there's tremendous opportunities. And the big competition in the future, it's not going to be for customers. It's going to be for human resources. And the people who can get the human resources are the people that are going to be rewarded with the customers. So I think there's some kind of real good upside to this. And I believe that where it's going to stop rewarding poor managers in the future. So let's look at the impact of this aging demographics and then kind of put over the top of that what we've seen with immigration over the last couple of years to get a real sense for what you're feeling and what it's going to look like kind of, a year from now, 5 years from now, and so on. So about 8,500 Canadians are going to retire every single week this year. Think about it, every single week. If you were to turn on Live at 5 tonight on the news and they said somebody just laid off 4,000 people, you'd think, oh my goodness, like that's a lot of people got laid off. But if you wait till the end of the week, 8,500 people are going to exit the workforce anyway, which puts us at about 450,000 baby boomers are going to retire each year. Now, this has quietly been happening through the pandemic as well. In fact, there were baby boomers that were on the fence saying, I'm not really sure if I'm going to retire. But then with all of this virtual working and the pandemic and the being nervous to go to work, a lot of them actually started to exit the workforce even a little bit early. So let me dig in, unpack some of the numbers, even unpack some of the numbers that Nancy might have talked about in her previous presentation. So our current jobless rate in Canada is hovering around 5.9%. Now, Nancy said 5% is fully employed. So what that basically means is that in the job market, the people that are looking for work are not the skill level that people are looking for. So there's a mismatch of skills. Now, with a 5.9% jobless rate, part of that is driven by provinces that have a higher jobless rate, like Alberta is 7% in the Calgary area, although a little less in northern part of the province. So there's some kind of things that are driving that value up and down. So, but once we get to that 5%, it becomes a pretty nervous place to be. Attracting talent will become every organization's primary concern. And I mean every organization's, every single industry is going to be impacted by what we're going to start to feel in the job market as we move forward. Hence why you're seeing it now, because you've seen an exodus of about 230,000 people that exited your industry and went into other industries. But that happened in other industries as well. Taxi drivers left the taxi drive industry to start driving trucks. So we're seeing this kind of movement as well. So we had 184,000 immigrants move into Canada in 2020, but the year before we had 341,000 immigrants move into Canada. However, during 2020, we actually had immigrants exit the country as well to go back with their families during the pandemic. So we may have had more like a zero immigration in that 2020 year. There were 401 new immigrants planned for 2021. The number actually came in probably closer to 220,000. The 401,000 were made up predominantly of a big group of people that were already here that were just kind of added into the numbers to give the 400, but it didn't give us a kind of new net immigrants that moved into Canada. Now, there's something that you really want to think about when you look at immigration versus people that are retiring. In Canada right now, if you're retiring, there's a pretty good chance that you're actually working. So when we say hit retirement age, so say if they hit 65, their retirement age, there's a pretty good chance that they're exiting the workforce. But if we have 400,000 people move into Canada this year, it doesn't mean that 400,000 people are capable of working. So we may recruit a mechanical engineer from another country, move into Canada and bring their family with them. And part of the family might not be employable for a few years. You know, maybe they're younger children and they want, be able to go in the job market. Maybe a spouse will come in and they're not employable right away. So even if you had 400,000 people moving into Canada and 450,000 people exiting, it's not like there would be a kind of a wash there. So you kind of got to look at the numbers a little bit more detail. Now, Nancy had hit on this, and this is a very, very important number. We have 1 million job vacancies in Canada right now. And then funny, in that 1 million job vacancies, there's actually 14,000 job vacancies for headhunters. And these are companies recruiting headhunters to go into your organization and recruit people to work in their organization. So about 1 million people, we've never seen that before in our country, about 1.5 or 10,500,000 in the US, but 7 of the 8 G8 countries are in the same situation as we are. Now, why this is so relevant is that if we look south of the border, they're coming north of the border for our employees. So when all the G8 countries or the majority of the G8 countries are in the same situation, then it becomes more of a global issue than, we would worry more about Alberta trying to recruit people in Atlantic Canada, that type of a scenario. But now we have to be worrying about people being recruited inside and outside of the country as well. So there's a phenomenon happening, and we're seeing it a lot here in Atlantic Canada, called hire anywhere, work anywhere. And that's where people are moving to Atlantic Canada to work in companies that might not even be in Canada, or they might be in larger centers. So they're working remotely in larger, kind of like I'm doing right now. Traditionally, I would be on an airplane flying somewhere, and here I am talking to you from right here in Halifax, actually. So the other kind of scenario that would hurt us would be, traditionally in Atlantic Canada, we'd always have kind of 3 types of people that would finish university, take their family and move to another part of the country and raise their children there. People that would hop on an airplane on Monday morning, fly somewhere else and fly home on Friday nights. And then you would have people that would say, no, I'm staying here in Atlantic Canada. Well, now we have companies that are coming in saying, oh no, stay in Atlantic Canada. We'd love for you to stay there, but work for us. So the pool of resources that we had here in Atlantic Canada is getting a little bit smaller. Now, in some cases, that actually works to your advantage because it puts more affluence in your neighborhood. And those would be the types of people that would have more disposable income to spend in restaurants and travel and so on. So there's an upside and a downside to it. Not everyone working in your community is actually employed in companies that are even doing business in Canada. So if we look at that 5.9% jobless rate, some people that are in that are working are actually not benefiting Canadian companies because they're working for companies outside. Again, they're benefiting the community they're in, but they may not, they're contributing to that 1 million person vacancy rate that we're seeing in Canada. And they're the other side of the 10.5 million people in the US where they're trying to recruit. Compete with wages and benefits of larger centers. So because we're starting to see people recruit our resources in Atlantic Canada, we're now forced to kind of look at the wages of other organizations or other areas where they can pay higher rates. So having said all of that, so that's the scare the bejeebers out of your part. So now let me give you some insight and some things you can do in your organization and what you should be looking at as you head into the future. I believe that this was probably relevant all along, but more important now, employee engagement is really the key to attracting people in your organization, to building that capacity and so on. But I want to give you a little bit of a history on engagement. This is kind of what your boss would have looked like at the turn of the century. He literally would have been a man, because before 1934, there were virtually no women in the workforce in Canada. Women really never entered the workforce till the men went off to war. And then when they came back from war, a lot of women exited the workforce again to have the baby boom population. So would have been a man, would have been horrible to work for, a bit of a tyrant. He literally is the reason why we have unions in Canada, is to protect us from this particular person. And then there was an evolution of leadership, and I went into it from that more of a telling style of leadership into a selling style of leadership. And that was driven predominantly by the baby boomers. Baby boomers love to have meetings. I mean, literally, if you work with a baby boomer, they will have a meeting about having a meeting. They'll say, let's get together on Wednesday and come up with the agenda for Friday's meeting. So it was definitely a step in the right direction, but it isn't really kind of where we need it to be. And, what we looked for then was compliance, accountability, but there were still low levels of engagement. And then in the earlier part of the 2000s, people started to look at this term engagement. It's rooted in science. There's a lot of really cool research around this. And really it comes down to this. When an employee is engaged, or you have strong engagement in your organization, it really comes from a place of inclusion and co-creation. It means everybody gets involved, that your clients get involved, your suppliers get involved, your employees get involved, your leaders get involved. And we have a more collaborative, and what we look for is something very magical, and it's called discretionary effort. Now, discretionary effort doesn't mean that your employees are plugged into your phone 24 hours a day. Discretionary effort means the work that they do when they're at work literally makes a difference. And there's a line of sight between them leveraging their strengths, the things that they're good at, and what you're trying to achieve as your organizational goals. And that's where all of the magic happens in your organization. What I like about it is there's something in it for everyone. An employee that is engaged in the workplace, they're happier at work, they have a better home-life balance, they align their strengths with what you're trying to achieve. From an employer's perspective, it's easier to attract people, retain people. You're more profitable. It's a safer environment. And from a customer's perspective, you give higher levels of customer satisfaction and increased referrals. So it really is kind of something in it for everyone. Now, Towers Watson does this survey every year, and they look at Fortune 500 companies, and this is what they've identified. In Fortune 500 companies that have low levels of engagement had an operating margin of about 9%. However, in the same industries, if they had a highly engaged workforce, that operating margin would pop up to around 14%. Now, there's nowhere in your organization you can add 5 points to the bottom line easier than turning on the team that literally walks in the door every day. You don't have to buy another piece of equipment. You don't have to lease another piece of software. You don't have to do anything else. Just take the team that walks in the door and get them to be a little bit more happy. And then if you look at engaged, enabled, and empowered, that operating margin would pop up to about 27%. So if we kind of look at it, 27% higher profits, 50% higher sales for companies with high levels of engagement, 50% higher customer loyalty levels, and 38% above average productivity. And, I think it's probably fair to say that engagement is at a bit of an all-time low in a lot of organizations. A lot of the stress that we're feeling right now because of the pandemic is driving that. And even my wife and I, when we go out and experience, restaurants and travel, I mean, my wife and I, we do about 100 nights a year in hotels. So we're really used to being served outside of our own home. And we keep saying to each other, we just have to expect poor service. And really, that's unfortunate that when we travel now, that we expect a lower level of service. And that's why I think that the companies that can engage their employees will give that higher level of service, and they'll get the customers in the end. So I want to share with you some numbers around engagement to really kind of drive this point home. So I'm going to use Gallup's terminology. So that's part of the Gallup organization. There's all kinds of different employee engagement survey stuff out there, but I will use theirs. So Gallup will tell you that 59% of the workforce are actually not engaged. And that's okay. They're good people. They put an honest day's work in. They show up every day. They're the ones that help you keep your lights on. They're just not your rock stars. They're your employees. They're doing okay, but they're not your rock stars. This group is your rock stars. About 27% of people that show up every day are just absolutely outstanding. And you know who they are. You know, you have go-to people. If you need something done, that's who you're going to call. And then we have this other group. They're called actively disengaged. And you kind of know who they are. They basically quit a long time ago, and they still show up every Monday morning for work. Now, we hear these numbers all the time, but I want to dig a little deeper into this so you really get a sense for what this kind of means. So if we look at this first group, this 27%, they actually deliver 60% of the total productivity. That's why engaged employees are so valuable. And you kind of know that because you know you have those people, you know, on site. It's kind of like that old 80-20 rule. They would always say that 20% of your sales reps would sell 80% of your business, or in B2B, that 80% of your business comes from 20% of your customers. Well, on the pure labor market, 27% of people that show up do 60% of the work. Now, the next group, remember that 59%? They're good people. They're just not knocking it out of the park. They also do 60% productivity. Now, anyone that's on this call that's a little bit numbers oriented, I might be losing a little bit of a credibility with you right now, but that's okay. I'll get it back. So basically what I'm telling you is that it takes twice as many employees in this group to do the same amount of work as your engaged people. But remember that other group I said, the actively disengaged? They actually do negative 20% productivity. So you have people that show up for work every day that are tearing it down as the rest of you are trying to build it up. But let me dig a little deeper into this for you. So we did some work with the Association of Financial Officers with the federal government and the University of Alberta, and we dug a little deeper into these numbers to see what they mean from a payroll perspective, because you're going to hear a lot around capacity building in the future. So that 27% of the workforce that are your best people, you're getting 90 cents in the dollar. That's the best you're going to get out of a human being. They might take the odd sick day, come in late now and again, a little bit of social media at work, maybe a little bit of gossiping. No one is a machine that's going to literally show up and start banging on a keyboard or whatever it is they're doing and work their 8 hours through. There has to be breaks and so on. But the productivity you're getting far exceeds the value from a payroll perspective. So that's where most organizations, all your profitability is in this group right here, this 27%. Now, this other group, the disengaged, you're getting 70 cents in the dollar. They might take a little bit more time off, a little less focus at work, a little bit more gossiping, you know, dip into the benefits package a little bit more. But this next group, the actively disengaged, you're basically getting 50 cents in the dollar. They take every sick day like it's a sense of entitlement. They go home late. They use gossip to undermine your success. Now, here's what I always find interesting about this. If we were kind of sitting in a ballroom right now and you all represented your organizations and we kind of looked around the room, what we would find is when I said this, people would giggle and they would whisper. Because what they did was they would identify that person. Oh my goodness, that's Jimmy at work, or that's Susan. She takes every sick day like it's a sense of entitlement. So my question is, if you kind of knew who this actively disengaged was in your organization, I always think like, why would they still be working there? But let me unpack these numbers a little bit more, just so you have a little bit more of insight into it. What you really want to do is minimize the damage the actively disengaged do in your organization and maximize the benefits of your most engaged people. So your policy should always be around your best employees and not to punish your worst employees, because then you have this tendency to maybe offend some of your best employees. So let me just look a little deeper into these numbers. Your best employees, that 27%, traditionally only 15% of them would ever consider leaving you. Now, I say this with a bit of a grain of salt right now, because we're seeing ridiculous offers for people to move from industry to industry or job to job. Now, for anyone that's on this call that would be in a management position, you pretty much should assume right now that everyone on your management team is being actively recruited by someone else right now. I mean, there's aggressive recruiting going on, but traditionally this group doesn't move, and they don't normally move for money. They normally move for like career opportunity or something like that. Now, 85% of your disengaged group are actively looking right now for other work. So if you think about it, 59% of your workforce, 85% of that group are actively looking for work right now. So this is where we're seeing a lot of movement, is in this disengaged group. Now, this disengaged group doesn't mean they're not good people. Someone else could hire them and they could become their rock stars. It's just they might be a little undiscovered within your organization of what their real true strength or value to your organization might be. Engaged employees will recommend your place as a place to work and a place to do business. There is no better way to promote your businesses than engaging the people that's in there. It's the easiest way to build that marketing, and it's the easiest way to recruit people into your organization. Capacity building is going to become, I mean, even financing now, banks are going to start asking for, how are you going to build capacity into the business that you already have? And the best way to build capacity is to leverage that 27% and get them to recruit people from the 59%, join the ranks of the happy and build that capacity in your organization, because that's where the profitability and the cost containment and all of those wonderful things are. Culture versus strategy. I got to tell you, culture will eat strategy for lunch every day. You can't execute strategy without building the right culture into your organization. So let's talk a little bit about kind of that engagement thing. Now, here's your aha moment. If you can get your head wrapped around these next 3 questions, it will make the rest of your life managing people and working a little bit easier. So here are the 3 questions that every single employee ask, and literally every single employee that's on this call would ask these same 3 questions. And the first question they always ask, why is this job even important to me? And that will come down to things like benefits, paycheck, geography, vocation, location. I studied it in school. It's what I want to take. I always wanted to work in this industry. So it's the first questions that people ask. The second question everyone asks when they walk in the door is, who am I going to work with? Who do I interact with every day? What's my boss like? Do I interact with clients every day? Do I interact with bureaucrats? Do I interact with people within the organization? Who do I spend my time with every day? And the third question everyone asks when they walk in the door is, what exactly do you want me to do? What activities am I going to do every day when I walk in the door? Now, here's how we answer these questions. And I have to tell you, it has significantly changed over the last 5 years as the workforce has become younger. So the very first question that everyone asks when they walk in the door, why is this job important to me? It's actually why they joined your organization. Now, it's really interesting here in Atlantic Canada. If I was standing in front of a live audience now and I said, how many people out there have a dog? And you'd be surprised how many people put their hand up. Something interesting happens with these animals, these dogs of ours. So when we go off to work in the day, the dog, when you walk out the door, is basically devastated. They sit by the door and they kind of wonder, are they ever going to come back? And at the end of the day, you pull the car in the driveway and you walk up to the door and the dog starts wagging his tail and he's all excited. He goes, in his mind, the dog is saying, I can't believe you came back. I was wondering if you were ever going to come back. And you walk in and you give a little pat and he's all excited. And then you say to yourself, oh my goodness, I left the laptop in the car. I better go back and get it just in case somebody steals it. So you go to the car, the dog is devastated again, thinks you're never going to come back. You literally walk right back in the door and he gets all excited again. If there's one thing you walk away with today, that's the way you should act when your employees come back. You should almost say, I can't believe you came back. Is there anything I could do for you? I'm so excited. I think we have to get to a place where they're not doing us a favor, or we're not doing them a favor by hiring them. They're doing us a favor by showing up every day. So why is this job important to me? That's why they joined. Who am I going to be working with? That's actually why they stay. They stay if they like the people they're working with, if they like the clients they interact with, if they like their boss, if they like their fellow employees. Now, there is a myth. And the myth is that people don't leave companies, they leave their bosses. It is a reason why people leave, but it's not the reason. In fact, people would be happy to stay in organizations that they don't like their boss if they love the people they interact with every day. And we see it all the time in the workplace. The number one reasons why people leave their organizations right now is if they don't like what they're doing. Now, why is this so relevant? Well, for a couple of reasons. One is we have a whole bunch of people doing stuff that we didn't hire them to do right now. So we hired people with a very specific task in mind, and now we're asking them to do it differently, you know, and it could be something so simple as, you know, my son is a security guard in a post-secondary education facility here in Nova Scotia, and he was hired for a very particular thing, but now he finds himself policing, you know, the masking policy and all. So he's doing things every day that he wasn't hired to do, and he's not enjoying his job like he would have maybe, you know, prior to the pandemic. So this is the number one reasons why people leave. Now, the reason why it's so relevant now, and it wasn't as relevant in the past, is the older the workforce, the less important this question was. And I remember even saying to my father, you know, Dad, I'm looking for a job with purpose. And Dad would say, suck it up, Buttercup. It's work. It's not supposed to be fun. But the younger your workforce, the more fun comes into part of the play, and the more camaraderie and that second question, who am I going to be working with? The more they build that team becomes important as well. So this is the number one reasons why people leave organizations. I want to share with you kind of 6 key attributes to successful leadership in 2022. Now, I've been talking really fast, which is really cool because I'm probably going to get this almost back on time. And at least the people in the eastern part of the province would have understood what I said relatively well. So the number one attribute as we head into 2022 that a leader needs, and I think everyone needs it in general, is to be empathetic. And empathetic means you put yourself in the shoes of your clients, employees, partners, whoever it is that you deal with on a normal basis. And I think it's a trait that a lot of people have lost during the pandemic. You know, if your suppliers are having a hard time on the supply chain, if you're having we ask for that now. We even see signs that'll say, you know, please be patient with our service. We're short staffed. So to have that empathy for people, but also to have empathy for what your employees might be going through. You know, maybe one of the spouses is working from home, but they're also teaching their children at home, and all of the challenges that they're having in their lives outside of work as well. So empathy, number one trait a leader needs as we head into 2022. Number 2, you have to have flexibility. Now, I know that a hybrid work environment doesn't kind of suit everyone. Like it, you know, I talk in the transportation industry, obviously at this point, can't drive a truck if you're not at work, but to have that flexibility to allow people to work in a way that they may find works best for them. One of the previous speakers talked about, you know, tapping into that part-time employment sector, you know, looking at the way people might need to work to accommodate what's happening for them outside of work. And one of the things that you're going to find is that the pandemic has changed the way everything happens. Like, for example, if you have a contact us form on your website, if you have a contact us form and you don't respond in 25 minutes from the time someone does a contact us form on your website, there's a 72% chance that they're going to buy that product or service from someone else. Now, prior to the pandemic, that wasn't quite the case, but it's because we become so normal on the way that we would do things in a virtual environment. Like, how many of you are having packages delivered from Amazon that otherwise wouldn't have done that in the past? So have that flexibility with your staff, with your suppliers, with everyone that you kind of do business with, even if it's not impacting you. And all of the areas that we converge now will forever change around the way that we do work. Truthfulness and trust. The younger your workforce, the more truthfulness and trust becomes critical. And one of the things that drives this is lack of communication. So if people aren't communicating, then your staff start to think that maybe they're up to something, or maybe there's something I don't know, or should I be worried? Which kind of leads me to the next 2. If you look at the definition of engagement, the definition of engagement really means to take your individual strength and align it with the goals of the organization. And in order for someone to align their strength with the goals of the organization, they have to understand what the goals of the organization is. So be very, very clear on what their path to success is and what success looks like for your department or your business or so on, that you have that clarity. Now, prior to the pandemic, I read about 125 employee engagement surveys of Canadian companies, and I'd be willing to tell you that communication always bubbled to the top as one of the biggest issues that people just don't feel they're communicated with. And again, the younger your workforce, the more communication is important within an organization. But I believe now more than ever, communication is absolutely critical. Like anyone that's a leader or manager that's on this call right now, I would urge you to have at least a 10-minute conversation with your direct reports every single week on what are they doing this week? What can I help you with? Do you have any obstacles that are in the way? And even if we look now at evaluations or employee evaluations, we went from they should be every year to they should be every 6 months, and you almost want to be doing them every month now. Maybe you do like a major one once a year and you do a bit of a recap every month to keep that communication going so people truly understand what's expected of them, where you're going as an organization, and that you are communicating in a way that works. For example, I have clients of mine that will pick up the phone and call me because that's what they're comfortable with. And there's a good chance that they're, probably about 55 to 70 years of age. But if you're 22 years of age, they will tell you that your corporate email system or your phone is too slow, that they'll want to do some form of instant messaging. So when you're communicating, that you're communicating in a way that people actually hear your message. And the last one is to have that level of empowerment. And if we look back at Towers Watson, they said employees that were engaged, enabled, and empowered, they were the ones that gave you that 27% profitability rate. And in order to empower people, especially if you have people that are working for, maybe that short period of time, onboarding has to be very fast. So how do you get people to be onboarded very fast to give that highest level of empowerment? Now, I want to wrap up with this one slide, and this is going to give us a little bit of time to do a bit of a Q&A because I'd love to get a little bit of a conversation going here as well. I want to talk about 3 steps in closing the engagement gap. Now, if we were to spend more time together, I would spend 2 or 3 hours on this alone. So there's 3 things in closing the engagement gap and building that engagement in your organization. And one is, do you really want to get to know the people that you work with a little bit better? And there's 3 things that I always look at in getting to know people. One is based on gender. So if we look at gender in the workplace, the way we communicate with each other, our values, our beliefs would be very different across the genders. The next part would be around culture. And I don't mean culture from that perspective of building culture in your organization. I mean more from an immigration perspective. So, if we kind of look in Canada right now, every single new net job in Canada is going to be filled by someone who currently doesn't live in our country. So immigration has to be a big part of the future of everyone's planning. And then the last thing that I always look at, and this is the big disruptor in the workforce right now, it's 5 generations working together. We've never had to deal with this before, and it's a big deal. And, if you're, again, 65 years old and you're working with someone that's 20 years old, or you're 20 years old and your clients are in their 60s or 70s, then you really have to understand how to effectively communicate and understand the values across those 5 generations. And I think every organization should be spending time in looking at the generational differences and how do you embrace what's good in the generations and how do you leverage those differences as well as you go forward. I believe it's important to develop the skills in your organization, to look at the individual strengths of your employees and align them with the goals of the organization. And I believe that, it is our place as leaders to inspire and motivate people. And, just like I'm here to inspire and motivate you to want to make some changes in your organization, I believe it's a big responsibility for anyone, any leader, not just leaders, from an age perspective as well. I think the older we get, the more responsibility we have to train the younger people that come along in our industry to be able to, kind of get the most from them. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to on-share, and maybe I can even get maybe Scott to come back and we can do a little bit of a Q&A. There we go, Scott. I see you're back.
So it's funny, for those of you on the call that know me, know that this might not be a round peg in a round hole, because I have about 10,000 pieces of paper. I got 15 things I'm going to do with what I heard today, and my mind is spinning. So I'm going to do my best, to say the least. Thank you very much, Eddie. Again, a ton to kind of digest and see where it all sits with us. For me personally, something that I took away was that whole big bold statement of we're never going back. I think that a lot of us want to go back, and the reality that it's just not going to be there as an option for us is interesting and at times a little bit overwhelming. I don't think you were on the call when I started, when I first spoke today, but I had mentioned that this past Saturday was a long ways away from almost 2 years ago when we had locked the hotel down. And again, we were 90% and our rate was very good. And we probably did it with 30 less staff than we would have in 2019. And we did it with probably 40% of our staff being what I would call new, who had never experienced that level of business in one particular night. And I think that it lit a fire under them. And I know that the gratification that we felt as trainers and some of the more senior people around here, the pride was unbelievable. And I don't think it's going to take a lot for us to remind ourselves why this business was so incredibly important to us. So I do see a question there. I think that might be for Nancy. And Nancy,
I see that.
Nancy's obviously gone.
It's funny, when the pandemic hit, I was actually in a hotel in Fredericton and at an event that ended up being canceled because they had, the whole country had shut down at that point. And we had, in our business, because we depend on the conference industry, saw 90% of our business evaporate in literally 15 minutes. So we went through some significant changes as well, but I mean, we've kind of reinvented ourselves, even the way we deliver our products and services.
Yeah, of course. There is a question here. First one from Robin. Can you share some strategies to help drive disengaged leaders to reinvigorate this drive to adapt?
That's an interesting question. So if you kind of look at the 27% you're most engaged, 59% disengaged, and the 14% actively disengaged. I don't want to say the actively disengaged are lost cause, but the actively disengaged are kind of a lost cause. So what you really want to do is focus on that 59%, the disengaged group. So what I always urge people to do is that, and the only way you're going to kind of know what a person's strength is to have a conversation with them and say, what do you do at work that makes you feel really good? Because that by definition is what a strength is. So it's a simple little exercise everyone can do, and you can do it yourself and you can get your team to do it as well. For the next 14 days at 5 o'clock every day before whatever the end of the shift is, because you have a lot of shift workers, have them write on a piece of paper, what did I do today that made me feel really good, that made me feel powerful, engaged, strong? And then what did I do today that made me, feel weak or disengaged or unhappy? And what you'll do this for 14 days, and over 14 days, you'll find a pattern. And what you'll normally find is people that are disengaged at work do more activities that make them feel weak or disempowered. And people that are engaged at work tend to do more things that make them feel good. So at the end of 14 days, if you look at the list and you're only doing things that make you feel bad or disengaged, it's probably why the person is disengaged. So then what a good leader does is they would look at that person and say, well, how do I get them to do more things every day that makes them feel good, that makes them feel engaged? And how do I take those strengths and align them with my departmental goals? So I believe that everybody can be moved from that disengaged group into the engaged group. And what unfortunately happens more times than not is people will leave an employer, go work for someone else, and they'll get them doing things that they could have been doing at their previous employers. And all of a sudden they're a rock star with their next employer. because the first employer didn't take the time to really understand how to engage them. So I hope that helps a little bit. It's a big question to answer in a short little bite like
Yeah, of
this.
course, we've had instances where we've had people here who, you know, it just might not be the right department for them to excel in, and you make a small switch, and the next thing you know, the department head of the new department says, well, this person's a star. Why would,
Yeah.
you know, why would someone not be, this is a high performer. So it's, you know, round peg and a round hole it boils down to. I wonder if you might share some insight around mentoring in the workplace.
Well, you know, I believe mentoring is, I think the style of leadership that works right now is more around mentoring and coaching. So, and I believe as we see more baby boomers head off into their kind of well-deserved retirement, they have a responsibility to mentor people that are coming up through the ranks as well. And you're even seeing, like, you know, I have friends that may have worked their whole life in a particular job or position that are retiring and are going back as mentors or going back as teachers at the community college and so on. So I think that everyone has that responsibility to mentor people in the workforce. And I believe that the kind of the older, and I say that now because I am turning 60 next month, I believe that we have this responsibility to mentor people in the workplace as well. So I think it's critical for success right now.
It's funny, there's such an opportunity at the moment, especially for someone who was passionate about leadership in this business, because if you were, no matter what, sometimes we gravitate to if a young person, but no matter at what stage of your career you're at, if you want to feel some serious gratification in leading people, I mean, the tourism industry can, you know, as Patrick mentioned earlier and others, it's can be very unbelievable. So
yeah. And you know, you have a really fun industry. There are some industries that are really struggling to find people in Canada right now that wouldn't be near as much fun of an industry to work in as your industry. So you know, there is that opportunity to create an environment where people, you know, like we're seeing even in other industries, like the people that are getting very creative on how they're attracting people and keeping them in the industry. So they kind of think outside the box. Like I had a friend of mine that their daughter works in the accounting industry, and one of the big accounting firms said, you know, what if we just sent you to Spain for a year and you worked from there? Like people are getting so creative. Now, obviously you can't send someone to Spain, but it really makes you realize what people are thinking around attracting and keeping people interested in their businesses.
awesome. Well, seeing no further questions, I have a bit of wrap up here to do, and I would just like to first plug that today's session was recorded and it will be available on tourismstrong.ca. So please utilize that, everyone, if your day got cut short or wanted to catch up on a specific piece. At the end of the day, there's such an incredible opportunity for us to change tourism and change the way we've always looked at tourism. And I think that the opportunities are going to be great for us. And I think the opportunities are going to be great for how we change it for our customers too, because of course their expectations will change with time and change with trends as well. So B, I don't know if you have anything else you'd like to add.
Well, just thank you both, Scott and Eddie. Thank you very much. I think we all need a positive message, and you know, the opportunities we have right now from an employer perspective, but also from an employee perspective. I think it's exciting, and we have to look at it at that, and we have to move forward. And I love all your you know, the ideas and facts about how to engage your workforce. And I totally understand what you're saying, and I'm excited to go to work and empower some people here.
That's awesome.
Thank you very much.
So B and I got to take the co-chair role and got to be made look good by people like Eddie and Phil and Patrick and Tracy and Nancy, and of course the amazing team at Tie-ins and the council. So on behalf of everybody, thank you very much for tuning in. Again, this was step one of the forum. We definitely want to do something in the future in person, and who knows what this builds into, but we're going to do it together, and we're going to come out of this and we're going to have a lot of success together. So thank you very much, Eddie. Thank you, B, and thank you everybody who attended with us today. So take care, and we'll be in touch very soon.